This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You may sometimes wonder why on this programme we don't do a little, or sometimes we do, and I'm trying to be all grown up. We don't do a menu at the top of the show about what's coming up later. Who wants to have a go at guessing why that is? Anybody? Bueller? Yeah, because we haven't really got the first idea what's going to come up next on the programme. At the moment, contenders include a comment from a senior Netflix executive that cinema is sort of past it. Cinema is on the way out. And I'm really drawn to that story for two reasons. Reason number one is it kind of fits our Friday feeling, doesn't it? We like to do culture-y stuff and artsy stuff at 12 o'clock on a Friday. I don't know why, possibly because the weekend is for many of us our best opportunity to indulge in a little bit of culture. And the second reason is that I really love the cinema. And I watch a lot of films, and I can talk to you about what it is that's unique. Well, rather more importantly, you can talk to me about it. So that perhaps would fit the bill. I'm also drawn again to a topic, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, because let's face it, you usually do. That I don't think we've ever gone all in on before. And it seems to me to be the almost perfect moment to ask the question. If you cast your mind back 10 years, good Lord, 10 years, eh? The lost decade. If you cast your mind back 10 years, you will remember that there was widespread fear. What word would you use? Discombobulation would probably be the mildest at the prospect of what they called a European army. We were told constantly by the same people, to be fair, that told us that they needed us more than we needed them, and that we'd all be richer, and that the NHS would be fantastic, waiting lists would disappear, immigration would come down, if that's the thing that keeps you awake at night. Everything would be hunky-dory, tickety-boo, all of those things they told us. But they also told us, the same people, some of whom are still hanging around like unflushable objects, that the European army, the concept of a European army, was both on the horizon and a terrible thing. And I'm looking now at the question of why on earth we were ever told that would be a bad thing. It looks not only desirable, but pretty blooming urgent at the moment. So that's a contender for 11 o'clock. As is, shall I stop telling you what might come up and start telling you what is definitely coming up at 10? All right, one more. The claim at a select committee yesterday in the House of Lords, the House of Lords committee yesterday, that one of the main answers to the question we have asked many times, one of the answers to the question we have asked many times about why there are so many young people not in education, employment or training is, according to someone who apparently knows what he is talking about, is because they won't get out of bed for less than £40,000 a year, which, you might say fair play to them, but somehow I doubt it. And then there's the shoplifting story. I think fairly obvious relationship between society in general and crime in particular, but why the epidemic, and I think that's a fair figure, has become so all-encompassing. But I don't want to start with any of that today. Do I owe you an apology for this? Do you think I owe you an apology for this? For saying, oh, don't be ridiculous, you can't get the genie back in the bottle. I don't think I was that negative, was I? Back in the day, this is one of those moments where I find myself wishing I kept a diary. I don't really have to. There's a blooming great archive of everything I've said for the last 20 years. But who the hell wants to wade through that to find out just how strident I was on the question of somehow getting more controls on social media? I'd certainly always been in favour of it up to a point. I felt that when Elon Musk purchased Twitter and immediately started unlocking the accounts of various racists and hideous monstrosities, you sort of found yourself thinking, yes, regulation good, incitement to racist violence bad. But hey, he owns it, not me. So on it goes, on it continues. But the key question, and one that two things have really focused the mind on, in recent months. The first being the day that we dedicated on LBC to online safety, an incredible moment of radio when right across the schedules, every show was essentially putting their shoulder to the same wheel and focusing on the urgency, the necessity for change in the world of online safety, specifically of our children. But it does actually extend to many other areas and many other generations. And the second thing, of course, was the drama Adolescence, which really brought home how boiled a boy's brain could be by online activity, and how many malign influences were out there, how many bad actors, in some cases literally, but how many bad actors were out there seeking to make money, most obviously, but also just to accrue clicks and likes, to enhance reputation, to build profile, to achieve something, sometimes intangible, by essentially pouring poison into the public place. But that's not the whole picture, is it? I saw a lad on the train today. I sat down next to him on the way into work. I don't know how old, maybe 11 or 12. And he was obsessively arranging his hair, using his mobile phone as a mirror, right? I remember being that age. Denim on denim, since you ask. I remember being that age, and I remember spending a lot of time in front of the mirror with my Superdrug hair gel, trying to get my curls to obey the laws of gravity, frankly, let alone look like Mags Fernenholmen out of Aha, which was always my ultimate dream. But I remember doing that for quite a long time. But something about recent conversations about body image and about what social media does to young people just piqued my interest, and I found myself really hoping that he was doing what I used to do in front of the mirror before going to the roller disco in Kidderminster, and not embarking on some terrible sort of journey of self-loathing where he could never get his hair quite right. I mean, it went on for ages, otherwise I probably wouldn't have clocked it. And you just sort of thought that boy in adolescence talking about how he was ugly was possibly something that stayed with you for longer than the more obvious lessons of that program. The idea that there are boys and girls, obviously, being raised in many ways to hate themselves. And of course, if you hate yourself, as Donald Trump continues to prove daily, you think that hating other people and hurting other people will make you feel better about the chasm, the void where your soul should be. And it doesn't, of course. So politicians turn their attention to the problem. Politicians turn their attention to the issue. And they decide most recently, not just politicians, but also public figures. Prince Harry and his wife, and Meghan, have called for stronger social media protections for children. And they know of what they speak. I don't really know whether or not they spend much or any time looking at some of the poison and vitriol that is directed at them on social media, but it is, I mean, truly hideous. I'll tell you how hideous it is. It makes the Daily Mail look tame. That's how horrific the abuse of Prince Harry and Meghan on social media is. The racism is there, the misogyny is there, the hideous ad hominem attacks upon a war hero is there, the so-called patriots who are attacking somebody who actually went to fight for Queen and country when the Queen was his actual grandmother. It's all there. All of the well-documented hatred gets turned up to Spinal Tap volumes when it involves these two. So they know what they're talking about, but they're not talking about their own experiences. They're talking about children. And they say life is better off social media, reflecting on how grateful he is that his children are still too young to be online. The easiest thing to say is to keep your kids away from social media. The sad reality is the kids who aren't on social media normally get bullied at school because they can't be part of the same conversation as everybody else. This was at the unveiling of something called the Lost Screen Memorial, which is an incredible, I suppose we have to call it a piece of art, but it's an incredible phenomenon. 50 smartphone-shaped life boxes, each displaying a photograph of a child whose life was lost due to the harms of social media. Only open for 24 hours, and the children's images were shared by parents who were part of the Parents Network, set up by Prince Harry and Meghan's Archwell Foundation for parents whose children have experienced harm from social media. So we know it can kill. And the reason I sort of toyed at the outset with the notion of owing you an apology is because I'm pretty sure I used to hold quite firmly to the notion that you can't turn this oil tank around. Could have a little bit of figure of speech bingo, couldn't we? You can't get the genie back in the bottle. You can't turn the oil tanker around. You can't undo something that has become so pervasive and so prevalent as social media. But of course you can. Not only can you, but you absolutely have to. Do you know that the leaders of the London Marathon have shown more moral leadership than every government in the country by just removing their entire show from Elon Musk's sewer? Why? Because Chris Brasher, the founder and organizer of the London Marathon, has seen what sort of abuse has been directed at an athlete, and in this case the daughter of Liz McColgan, and the horrific abuse and vicious bile directed at her has prompted him to recognise that the entire platform is now utterly poisoned. It is something that he has no business, or he can't justify exposing athletes taking part in the London Marathon too. The entire London Marathon organisation, one of the biggest sporting events in the world. Hugh Brasher, sorry, not Chris Brasher, is to just boycott it. They haven't been on there since January 2025. I think that's the same as me, actually, but obviously this is a rather more important moment. Ailish McColgan, British Commonwealth 10,000 metre champion, exposed to demeaning and abusive body shaming on social media in March, and Hugh Brasher stepping in to cite it as an example of why the marathon will no longer post on X. Good luck to everyone, by the way, that is running on Sunday. So, what's the question? I think today is one of those days where I have to hit my marks, don't I? I just have to sing, if you like, not literally, don't worry, from the rooftops about how we can't be defeatist on this. We can't be negative. We can't be pessimistic. So let's begin with one example, one possibility that Peter Kyle, the digital secretary, told The Telegraph he was thinking of with regard to social media. He has mooted the notion of a watershed, a 10 p.m. watershed, whereby you have to open. And let me say, first of all, that we're not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. All right? I like that phrase. And we're not going to say that something's not worth doing because there will be loopholes and there will be ways of getting around it. But tempting though it is to ask you for your own suggestions, I want to begin with your thoughts on this. I've got two questions for you. One is pretty obvious, one less so. The first is, would this work? No, it's not, is it? The first is, why the hell wouldn't you try to do this? So in order to open an account, you have to register your age. You force them to bring in some sort of proper monitoring on that, like you do on gambling. TikTok is trying to introduce a 10 p.m. curfew for under 16, so you can't open an account unless they know your age. And if they know your age to be under 16, the whole of TikTok will turn off at 10 p.m. Oh, my kids will be able to get around it. I don't care. His kids won't. Her kids won't. And also, get off your backside and do something about it, because they're also going to offer parents tools to switch off access at set times. Other companies being encouraged to consider similar features. A lot of criticism in the news today of the Online Safety Act. We'll have a little look at that shortly. But what I want to begin on is the necessity of getting this particular genie back into its bottle, getting this particular oil tanker turned around. And if the social media giants do not do it, and they most certainly can, it's the thing that frustrates me the most about all of these conversations. It started, with tobacco companies and oil companies knowing full well the misery and pain they were causing to populations and investing billions and billions and billions of dollars in preventing the dog from seeing the rabbit, in keeping the truth from the people they were harming. And of course, they sign up client journalists and so-called think tanks and lobbyists and all sorts of bad actors to promote and to propel and to inflate the lies they tell so that they can continue killing us with fossil fuels and cigarettes. And this could be exactly the same. You remember that documentary that showed showed some of the big cheeses in Silicon Valley wouldn't let their own children anywhere near the technologies that they were making billions of dollars from imposing and inflicting upon our children. So we've got to do it. We've got to get robust age checks in place, and we've got to get watersheds intact, imposed, and we've got to get a proper removal, if you like, of harmful content. Ensure that harmful content cannot reach our children. So there are two types of people listening to this program. People that know a lot about the issue technologically. I'd like to invite you to come to the front of the queue. And then the rest of us. And if you're going to address the question of whether you want this, I'm afraid I cannot currently conceive of anybody saying no. No, I don't. I want my children to be sitting up in bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, fretting about the way that they look, or worrying about their social life, or getting concerned that they're being bullied online. That is question number one. Do we need this curfew? 0345 6060 973. And obviously, if you're in the second category, the reason why you know what you're talking about is because you've seen what it can do to your children. And those stories never get old. They never get tired. And I don't think we should ever stop telling them how you know that a curfew would work. 0345 6060 973. And then the other question, which I won't ask now, or I'll ask it, but I won't go into any detail on it because it's nearly 20 past 10. It's about how we get any measure at all of how much damage is being done. Because for every adolescence, there's a million kids who are never going to stab anybody, but whose lives are measurably worse as a consequence of their exposure to social media. How do we know how bad it is? I've never asked you that before, but I'm going to ask you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. So in classic Friday morning fashion, I've spent 20 minutes talking to you without really setting up a proper phone in. So here it is, okay? How do you know how bad it is? How do you know how bad it is that our children can sit up in bed almost all night, tippity-tappeting away on their phones and exposing themselves to obvious and unobvious harm? It is really a question that speaks directly to the necessity or desirability of a 10 p.m. curfew on under 16s accessing any of this. How do you know how important it is? And I want you to hit the numbers now and tell me, all right? 0345 6060 973. And one way of doing that is to imagine a skeptic, somebody who I was probably 10 years ago, who talks a lot about moral panics and files teenagers on social media under all the previous moral panics that we've had. So the people that told us video games were going to destroy civilization as we know it. The people who told us that video was going to kill the radio star, if you want to get personal about it, because he's still here. But the idea that almost every new development, whether it's technological or social, is going to scare the horses, is going to create a catastrophe, is going to undermine normality and tradition. I am now 100% certain that this is completely different, that this phenomenon does not deserve to be filed under the same subject headings as video games or violent films or Lady Chatterley's lover. I'm 100% certain of that. And what I can't do is explain perfectly to someone skeptical why that is. So I need you to do that. Partly the problem is, oddly, that I went to boarding school, because if you go to boarding school, you never escape. You can't go home and close your door. So a lot of people say, oh, it's different because it means you can't go home and close your door. But we never could. So I need you to explain why this is different and how you know how bad it is. And all of that feeds into the question about the desirability or otherwise of the curfew itself. And as James points out, it possibly began with the printing press. Alex is in Warrington. Alex, what do you want to tell us?
Hi, good morning.
Hello,
I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome, Alex.
Hi, thank you. So, I'm a primary school teacher. I've also got a 2-year-old son, and I find I'm having to relearn my own sort of habits and relationship with being online and social media.
How many?
It's just changed.
How many primary school children have relatively unfettered access to it, do you think, in your experience?
It's hard to say what their access is at home, but
Sure.
I would say they are very computer literate because they, when we teach computing at school, they know how to set up an iPad straight away. It's their bread and butter, so they know what to do. And when when to the point where even when they've been given a desktop computer or a laptop, they start touching the screen.
Wow.
It's a whole
because they're so used
world.
to they're so well. I mean that's relevant, isn't it? Because it shows how the technology has reprogrammed our children in a way, even though that isn't in and of itself evidence of harm. What I want you to tell me is why this is different. So, from the printing press to comics to video games, all through the years, old people have always said that the latest thing that young people are doing is going to destroy civilization as we know it. And guess what? They've been wrong. Why is it not? Why is this not the same?
I think it's because it's that constant stream that there hasn't been before. So I'm 30, and I think growing up with the sort of dial-up internet, there was still that learning to wait, that patience, and everything's just so instant now. And it's harder to learn, and for children to learn that patience if everything is just there.
And how does that impact on your work as a teacher?
I think it can certainly impact it. I think teachers out there, primary, secondary, and above, will all agree it's that sense of immediacy, that sense of, especially when it comes to navigating difficult situations they might find themselves in, whether that's with their work or whether that's with social or friendship issues. It can be harder for them to navigate their emotions.
Effort and compromise. Do you know Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Anxious Generation, which is done very well? He's in town at the moment. He has been speaking recently about children losing their ability to think.
Gosh, yeah. Wow,
I think Keith was worried the emergency tape was going to come on then, Alex. I don't know whether you were having a sip of tea or whether you were stunned into silence. But I think I know what he's talking about.
I'd say so. Thankfully, I've still seen a lot of creativity in children.
Good.
I think it's very important in schools that we foster that. We keep that alive, but certainly increased screen time can, I think, mean we've got to be careful that doesn't impact on their creativity, because it very well could if we continue to go down this way, which I think is why we need, what was it you called it, like a curfew?
Yes.
I think that's just needed. And I think not just for the children, but adults as well, because they learn from us.
You try and impose it your own. It's a really good idea, actually.
If you see we do it, that we're off our phones at 10, because I think we've all become a bit addicted as well to these phones, because they've been designed to make you go on it more. I think if children see that we're off it, they're not going to, they learn through copying behaviours.
I'm so drawn to sort of tabloid simplicity. I'm looking for the 3 A's, and you've given me 2. You've given me algorithm and access. So the way that they are designed to be, I suppose addiction could be the other one, couldn't it? The 3 A's, algorithms, access and addiction, all explain why this is different from previous moral panics. Final question. Do you, and obviously the children you're working with as a primary school teacher are younger than the sort of stereotypical image of the teenager on there all the time. But do you think their sleep is being affected? Do you think that children are not getting what I think is now called sleep hygiene?
I would say a lot of children do struggle with sleep, and that could very well be down to screen times or elongated screen times, especially if devices are kept in bedrooms. Yeah. Again, there's only so much we know as teachers, but you can assume that if a lot of adults keep their phones in their bedroom, it could be that children who have tablets, they could...
And we haven't got the first idea about the science, and of course the effort that will be put into keeping the science from the people does stand comparison with the oil companies and the tobacco companies. Alex, what a brilliant debut. Ben picks up on some of your points when he writes, this is vastly different from what's gone before due to the fact that there is now a direct, purposeful, psychological attack on your children that there wasn't in the past to get them hooked. The algorithm is what makes this so different to all past technology. So algorithm and access are the first of my 2 A's. I think addiction is a consequence of those 2 things. So I don't know that can be the third of the 3 A's that I'm lazily looking to construct. Do you know what I just thought of? I don't know if you were listening earlier this week when I invited two lovely people into the studio because they've made a film about the ZX Spectrum. And I was reflecting so fondly upon the summer holidays, the endless summer holidays that I spent tapping away on the rubber-keyed Spectrum playing games. And even then, people were convinced that this meant that we'd raise generations who couldn't play sport, who couldn't kick a ball or throw a... I don't know, what do you throw? Throw a cricket ball. Couldn't kick a ball or throw a ball. There you go, loads of balls, just like PMQs. I mean, I look back on that so fondly, so rose-tinted. It kind of helps plot the difference, doesn't it, between what children who are, quotes, addicted, end quotes, to what we're describing today are going through, and what children who were supposedly, quotes, addicted, end quotes, to playing Jet Set Willy were going through in the 1980s. It's 10:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. It's pinning it down. So, and some of this is I think this is going to be the only subject where I turn off my repetition alarm. You probably caught me getting a little bit frustrated sometimes if we return to a topic and people call me to tell me stuff that we've heard before. There's two problems with that. The first is the arrogance of thinking that everybody pays as much attention to this programme as Keith does. Keith? Thank you. Yeah. You have me on in the background. Terry Wogan was a great recognizer of this fact. Often I'm not in the forefront of your mind, even if I'm in the forefront of your radio. So you may well not have heard a lot of this stuff before, and I don't think you can over-egg this particular pudding. And the second reason why I sometimes have a bit of a repetition alarm is that I behave like a listener. So I think to myself, I've heard this before, I don't want to hear it again. But what if it's really important that you hear it again? What if it's really important that we hit people over the head with some of this stuff until, or we bang our heads against this particular brick wall until the brick wall starts crumbling instead of our heads? And that's why perhaps the question I should have asked a little earlier is the one about explaining why this is different, and therefore why this needs something as far-reaching and outwardly difficult as an actual curfew on access to social media platforms at 10 p.m. for all under 16-year-olds. Hannah is in Oxford. Hannah, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm just ringing because when I was younger, I'm 24 now, but when I was about 14 and I had a phone and it was all kind of being developed and social media was all coming out as I was entering my teenage years. But I got online, I got on social media, and I had an eating disorder, and it didn't completely come from social media.
Your phone line went a bit funny then. You said that you developed an eating disorder.
Oh yeah, so I developed anorexia, and I had my social media, and I started to meet people online that also had eating disorders, and a whole kind of community was built, and I became very well. And, I'm not putting it all down to this, but it was a huge contributing factor because I found sort of a community that I think teenagers need and so desperately search out, is just to feel understood. And I went into hospital, I went into a psychiatric ward, and they banned phones there except Nokia bricks, which nobody knew how to use.
So everybody on the ward had their phone taken away, their smartphone?
No, you weren't allowed them. They were just blanket rule banned, except
just think for a minute, and I know you don't need to, but the rest of us could do, I think, with a moment of pause to reflect on why they would do that. I mean, it's such a powerful point, such a powerful moment to think that children whose mental health is in crisis turn up at a facility designed to protect and hopefully help them get better, and one of the very first things they do is say, I think you better leave your smartphones at the door, guys. Crazy, isn't it? I don't know a lot about that world of eating disorders, but I know that it becomes, I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah, that it almost becomes a place where you get encouraged to get worse.
Yeah, I think it's very competitive by nature, but I think in terms of the individual and another individual, there certainly was not encouragement. It's just the eating disorders themselves compete, but the people, there were some great people there. I made friends. It's just the nature of it. But the actual ward itself, it wasn't just eating disorders either. It was all mental health. And so everybody was fun. It wasn't just that. It was, all sorts of mental health difficulties. And we all found it really difficult. I particularly, I very much got thought it was just unfair. I thought it was wrong. Just purely out of principle. I thought, who are you to tell me? I'm a teenager, But
so I hope they responded, well, I know, but I'm a doctor.
Yeah, honestly, I would fight with them like anything. But you look back now, and I go, oh my goodness, I didn't even make the connection. I was too young. I was too.
Oh wow.
I at that time I really didn't. And this, I went back a couple of times, and it's only really been the last kind of year when I've looked back and gone, I didn't even realise what that was doing to me. I didn't realise. I was just everything. My parents trying to monitor phones, same as my sister who's younger than me, but it just feels so unfair. And that's why I think you need such strict regulations on it.
Oh, you're brilliant. That's such a brilliant point, because it's chicken and egg, isn't it? Because you were raised with a right to your phone, which means that for your generation, taking that away felt like an infringement of your rights. For future generations, it can't be a right. I know it's a lot easier to say than it is to implement, but it is as if, it's like alcohol or a gun or a knife or a car. There should be access restrictions based upon your age. It should be as obvious as the world. If you turned up at the hospital and the doctor said, and you were 15, and they said, oh, we're going to take away your car keys, you wouldn't feel that was a terrible infringement of your rights, would you? And yet to take away your smartphone felt like an affront. I presume your relationship with the technology is much healthier now.
Yeah, recently I've just actually decided just to come off for a bit, and even in the short time I've come off, you suddenly realise how much more other things feel like fun, whether it's reading or, doing a card game or just whatever else. I just don't think there's the awareness, or there is there, but people don't really understand it. It is an addiction. It is so much like a drug in the sense it does corrupt your brain, and especially for adolescents and young people whose brains are so fragile. Emotionally, our teenagers are so fragile. Just to actually give them something like a phone, and social media. The way that
you now know that you didn't realise then what was happening and how insidious it was is incredibly powerful. Final question: Would a curfew have made any difference? Because having it taken away from you completely when you were very ill is one thing, but if you hadn't been able to get online, because all the content that you accessed would still be there when you got back online the next morning, wouldn't it? So it may not be necessarily one of the things that would help someone in your position, this notion of a curfew.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think, anything and everything really is necessary, but also when it first came out, there was just not really restrictions on what you could post. So people really, like this, it just was being created as I was developing, I was that generation where it was brand new to my parents, to everyone.
And so they didn't know what to do.
I think recently they said they were going to loosen the restrictions on what you can and can't post. That really worried me.
Well, because it costs money to have restrictions in place, which is, just to get sort of geopolitical for a nanosecond, which is one of the reasons why people like J.D. Vance and Elon Musk are accusing this country of having a problem with free speech, because they're absolutely terrified about what would happen to A, their income streams, and B, their political support if social media was no longer allowed to post dangerous and or dishonest content. Hannah, thank you. That was so helpful, and would have spoken to an awful lot of people, not just parents or indeed people who've been through what you've been through, but the notion of trying to identify why this is different from everything that has gone before, and therefore it is a moment where you have to try to get the genie back in the bottle, or to turn the oil tanker around, or whatever figure of speech you prefer to describe something that is considered close to impossible. It doesn't apply here. We have to try. We owe it to everybody. We owe it to the little girl that Hannah used to be. We owe it to future children. We owe it to current children. You have to do something. And I think we need to do this more as well. We need to talk about fossil fuels and tobacco more. There's still people out there trying to claim that fossil fuels haven't had a terrible impact on our planet. An act of such epic, murderous dishonesty that you should be drummed out of public discourse and for the duration. But they're still out there getting money, often not disclosing who actually funds their so-called think tanks, where they put money into resisting attempts to limit the use of fossil fuels or even tobacco. So this is exactly the same. So much money is being made that you can leave your morals at the door. And we'll carry on doing everything we can to make as much money as we can out of people like Hannah. It's 10:42. Jeff's in Reigate. Jeff, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Hello. Yeah, we've spoken before. I'm quite excited about this opportunity because I've messaged you a few times about the insidiousness of social media. I think the curfew is absolutely essential and overdue. I think it's the tip of the iceberg, though. Yeah. You know, what you've got is previously a rite of passage almost. When you get to secondary school, you get your smartphone, but that's got a lot younger. The biggest problem I've got with social media is something you mentioned, is the algorithms, machine learning and AI. Now, all social media, let's just say Facebook, Instagram and YouTube particularly, they make money off advertising, and advertising is based on how much content is watched for how long and shared. Now, the automation of algorithms, machine learning and now AI determines which content makes the most money and automatically promotes that and distributes it. Now, the trouble is, though, that the social media companies are not in a position, they admit, they don't do enough fact-checking. They don't moderate it. They've got a monster that's out of control, that's automatically distributing misinformation, conspiracy, hate, division, extremism, misogyny, sexism. And that's what our kids are starting to go down rabbit holes on, let alone the fear of missing out, which all teens have. So there's a real problem. You've got to educate parents. If you're going to turn the Wi-Fi off at 10, then you need to tell your sons particularly, listen, if you're on Fortnite or FIFA, you've got to finish match by 10 because it's going to go offline, and that's going to cause an absolute
well, that's if you're doing it.
Tsunami,
that's if you're doing it domestically. I mean, the curfew, the one that TikTok is trialling, is the idea that they will have registers of everyone's account, which will contain age verification, which is definitely doable because we know that the gambling companies do it, and therefore they would be responsible. I think I prefer that. I don't really like, largely because it's often the most vulnerable people who slip through nets, where it is sort of the parents' job to do the job. That's what society is. It's what society should be. It should be looking after all children, even the children who haven't got parents who care and or understand what's going on. Is that feasible, do you reckon? Do you reckon the technology could... It's not going to reach all of the people all of the time, but I reckon it will make a big difference.
I think if that legislation could come in with social media and make it the responsibility of the likes of TikTok. I mean, it's interesting that TikTok content in China is much more educational. It's completely different. There are laws in China that don't let kids play many video games. Even though there's 660 million Chinese people play video games, it's mainly mobile games, but actually consoles and PC is really restricted.
Is it?
And the time allowed to play is really restricted as well.
I don't worry so much about that. Isn't your background in video games?
That's right, yeah.
I thought so.
I'm still an addict, of course, and we talked about the Spectrum documentary, yes.
No, I don't mind video games in the same way. I think I don't want to put them. I don't want to conflate them. I think that this combination of algorithm and access, and it's easy to take your kids' access to video games away. You can nick their console, can't you? I mean, but the phone.
Well, you can. I think it's education is too much of a good thing. It's restrictions and barriers and timing. You know, if you say you can play games for 2 hours, but then or read a book for an hour, you can play a game for an hour. You know, there needs to be some sort of encouragement.
Yes, well, this is why the lecture that Jonathan Haidt gave, I think it was last night actually, talks about how children, and I don't know whether we should stay with this topic in the next hour, about destroying a teenager's ability. Smartphones are destroying a teenager's ability to read, write, and study maths. It's looking at educational attainment in the UK and the US, which is dropping for one of the first times in recorded history. We know about the exponential rises in things like mental illness and self-harm, but alongside that, this phenomenon of teenagers being glued to their phones. And of course, it's not just teenagers. This is part of the conversation that we all have to acknowledge. It's grown-ups as well that you're likely to see walking down the road glued to their phone, even as they run the risk of running into a lamppost. But the idea that it is actually robbing them of the ability to read, write and study maths, if that doesn't make you sit up and take notice. No one ever claimed that playing Jet Set Willy was going to rob you of the ability to read, I don't think. If they did, they were a bit daft. But this looks real.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:50. That picture, was she Danish? Was it a member? It was like a princess from a royal family and an official portrait. Sheila talked about it earlier this week, who just couldn't put her phone down. It was an absolutely extraordinary moment. But not necessarily evidence of any broader or deeper malaise, just the absolute normality now of abnormality. Simon Cooper, writing in the Financial Times, one of my favourite writers, talking about that point I made earlier. I think that must have been where I got it from. The tobacco companies and the oil companies are the places you should look to for guidance on what the social media companies are up to now, what the platforms are up to now. They know the harm that they are doing. But there's so much money involved that they have to carry on. They have to move heaven and earth to carry on. So they have to sign up client journalists. They have to set up actual lobby groups, pretend that they're think tanks, secretly fund them, find politicians who are either in their pocket or so desperate for power that they think that propelling the lies that are spread by these lobbies, and they are identical, I would imagine, probably ultra-processed food as well. So I'd put for oil, I'd put ultra-processed food, I'd put tobacco, and I'd put social media platforms in very, very similar categories. And you know that the story has been written by the first two on what's going to happen with the next two, unless we're very careful. Lucy is in Lee in London. Lucy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello, Lucy.
I totally agree with the addictive nature of phones. We've got two children, 17 and 15, and it's a constant live conversation in our household. We do all the downtime, the app limits. We do everything we can to monitor it. And I think a curfew is not a bad idea, but what I would find more beneficial is a limit on the quantity, the number of hours, according to age, that children can access these things. Obviously, we hear through the media all the negatives of social media, which are, of course, are vast. However, they do use social media for positive things as well.
So they can't not have them. I mean, some schools, the whole timetable, the homework apps, everything is done through smartphones. But a 10 p.m. curfew wouldn't affect that, would it? Not for a 15-year-old.
Well, the fact of the matter is that if they've been on for 9 hours, does stopping at 10 really make the difference? I think it's the length of time that they're on these things. I notice with our children, they're less confident socially. They go to hang out with each other. They're all on their phones. They don't really know how to make eye contact. They say to me, well, what do I say?
Really?
And that wasn't the case before. And we vastly restrict. They don't really have any TikTok or Instagram, but they do have Snapchat. And it is constant, the addiction for them to want to be on it. Our 17-year-old is going to be going to uni soon. We can't do screen time when he's in uni. So we're just hoping that we're training him now to know how to manage it himself for when he's free.
Because otherwise he may never leave his room.
That's the concern. I mean, they talk about wanting to take their consoles to university. So, where does it end?
I'd be less worried about that. I'm just another parent, so I could be completely wrong. Yeah. But a console in a hall of residence, I think, could be quite a social thing. I think you invite people
in their room,
Yeah. You invite people into your room, you chat while you're playing.
Potentially.
It is this holy trinity, TikTok, Snapchat and Instagram.
Yeah, that's right.
Addictive, instant distraction and gratification that I think is different from everything that we went through, different from everything that's gone before.
Absolutely. They think they're so busy that they haven't got time to do things that are positive, but the time they're spending is wasted on swiping and these short videos,
And what are we going to do about it? The answer is we'll try anything, I think. That needs to be the answer. It's quite unpolitical. It's not how politics normally works, but the sense of urgency seems to me to be lacking. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps Peter Kiley is going to follow up his words with actions. Lucy, thank you. That's a brilliant call. And right from the heart of the issue as well. Watching that thing that we haven't really talked about before, that breaking of something, that notion that children are being robbed of the ability to read, write and study maths, as Jonathan Haidt has opined overnight at a lecture in London, actually. But also, as Lucy reminds us, we recognise this. You remember what I used to say? I used to make a right flip-flop of myself, banging on about eye contact and handshakes, because that mattered to me. So the way I was raised, the kind of school I went to, my dad was a big one for handshakes, If you weren't raised that way, you reach out to shake someone's hand, they think you're a weirdo. So you've got to make eye contact with people. And it does help. And I imagine there's a kind of psychological rationale for why, if you're going into a job interview, shake someone's hand and make eye contact is going to make a much better impression than not shaking their hand or having a really sort of limp handshake and not making eye contact. But that's not even on the page compared to what some young people are reduced to these days. As Lucy says, they just don't know how to behave. Terrified of making phone calls was a story this week, which, is too easy to understand, isn't it? And all of this, perhaps, down to that insidious combination of instant gratification. Why are you going to do something that involves effort when you can get instant distraction and instant gratification? We all like distraction and we all like gratification. But you can have too much of a good thing. Martin's in Newark. Martin, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, morning, James.
Hello,
loving the show, as
Thank
per.
You. Thank you, mate.
Your point about video games actually links into what I was hoping to speak to you about, in that video games are rated by the BBFC.
Yes, no, they are, yes.
So, even if we ignore what the BBFC say and access things that are probably too mature for us in terms of content, we're doing that with a bit more knowledge. I think I come from the background of about 15 years working as a senior school teacher.
Okay.
And I had to give up my job for two reasons, really. One, I didn't think that I was being effective in the classroom anymore, because I think children, you're talking about reading, writing, trying to battle that.
Is that real, do you think? This idea that...
it's so real.
Wow.
It is absolutely real. I mean, it's so hard to get children to read a book for, your GCSEs or your A-levels. I mean, even when you're choosing to do English literature at A-level, I had lots of children who choose to do it, but they would really struggle to read a novel by themselves. I mean, that kind of idea, it became futile.
But they could read. So there's two different propositions here. The first is the attention deficit. So they're losing the ability to actually read, as in literacy, but more importantly, they're losing, or more obviously, and presumably more widely, they're losing the ability to just engage for long enough to make a meaningful relationship with whatever it is they're engaging with.
I think part of it is imagination, if I'm absolutely honest. A lot of us, when we read, that creates a series of images in our heads and makes us think of things and connect to other ideas. And I think they're less used to doing that because everything is so instant and shallow, I think, a lot of the time.
Is there a pivot point during the years when you were teaching? Is there a moment where you sort of thought, crikey, this is different from everything that's gone before?
I mean, I think after 2008, the arrival of the iPhone, smartphone life, I think that changed it. But I also think it's not very helpful that phones are so integrated into school life. You're talking about homework apps and everything else. It just means that kids expect their lives to be on their phone. Everything is done through their phone.
But your life is on your phone.
Yeah, my life is on my phone.
My life is on my phone. It's a tricky one. That it's a real. Just to go for the hat trick of cliches, after turning the oil tank around and getting the genie back in the bottle, that really is trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake, isn't it?
To a certain extent, but I would also say that it's what the children are engaging with online that's so different. Going back to the BBFC point, they're accessing content that's way too, I would say, traumatic for them. And I think that's also impacting how their imaginations work and how they focus. Traumatized people do find it hard to focus and get on with things that people who aren't traumatized can normally find it much more easy to do. So I think that there's a kind of dangerous combination of things that, while a curfew is a step in the right direction, I would say, if they're traumatized by something during the day, the night's not necessarily going to be that different.
And it's still going to be there the next morning, of course.
Exactly.
But I don't know. I'm going to push back on this very gently and politely, just by saying it's better than nothing. It's not. We're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, and the curfew will address some of the elements of instant gratification and addiction, even if it doesn't address some of the stuff that came up earlier with eating disorders or some of the stuff that you're talking about with regard to trauma. So no one act of legislation or act of God is going to fix all of the problems caused by social media and teenagers. And in fact, whatever we do, whatever anybody does, no one's going to fix all of the problems. But that's not a reason not to fix some of them or to try to fix some of them, is it?
No, I wouldn't disagree with that for even a moment. but I would suggest that if we could delay the mobile phone's arrival in young people's lives to 16, I think, personally, that would have a revolutionary and positive effect on how they think, how they develop, and how we just prevent them from accessing stuff that's maybe too much for someone who's...
And again, I would do both. I do poacher and gamekeeper, as it were. So yes, do have much wider education on this issue, much more encouragement to parents to postpone that moment of engagement. But also, with regard to the specific content that they can see if they do get on, there's got to be much bigger punishments in place for the platforms that host it. I keep coming back to LBC. I keep thinking that imagine if the owners of LBC, imagine if Global Radio tried to claim that what you say on this programme, what Martin says on this programme, it would be tricky to argue that what I say on this programme has nothing to do with them because they pay me. I know, I can't believe it either, but they do. They pay me to do this. But imagine if that Martin now said something absolutely hideous, outrageous, illegal, libelous, insightful, all of the things, the kind of stuff that many household names were tweeting during the Farage riots last summer. Imagine if he now did that here. And Global Radio said it was nothing to do with us. Absolutely nothing to do with us. I mean, that's the situation that we are currently living in with social media. You can go on there and you can incite people to violence, you can tell racist lies, you can commit libel, you can do anything you want. And the owners of those platforms who make billions of dollars potentially from the presence on those platforms, from the attention that you are providing, the attention you are giving, they get paid for. And their response is exactly the same as if Global Radio responded to a libel, a crime, a hate crime, an incitement, any of those things. If Martin, it's not just Martin, but any caller. Martin sounds like a lovely guy with a particularly nice laugh, as a few of you have picked up on. But incredible, really, to reflect on that. And you know what they'd do? You know what they'd do? If they were as bent and as corrupt and as dangerous as the people that own the platforms like TikTok and Twitter, or whatever it's called now, X, they'd call it free speech. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, I can't keep saying Martin. Let's come up with another name. John or Doris. Doris has just incited violence. Doris has just come on LBC and encouraged people to go and set fire to a specific asylum processing centre. She's come on LBC, given out the address and encouraged people to go and set fire to it. She's told lies about the culprit of a recent murder. She's told lies designed to whip up hatred against a specific ethnicity or against a specific section of society. She's come on LBC and she's libelled the Prime Minister or, I don't know, Nicole Kidman. She's said incredibly untrue and damaging things about Prince Harry and all of these things. She's told lies, she's incited, she's done all of these things. And the owners of this radio station turned around and said, it's nothing to do with us. And anyway, we believe in free speech. So Doris will be back at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
James O'Brien on LBC.
6 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you remember when I described Keir Starmer as being ruthlessly pragmatic or pragmatically ruthless? Keith does. One of my colleagues doesn't. They just said, Nick Thomas-Symonds has just come up with a really good way of describing the Labour Party's approach to Europe. It's going to be ruthlessly pragmatic. I said, yeah, that rings a bell. You ever heard that phrase before? No? Okay. That's why I opened this hour with a beleaguered sigh, albeit one with a rather large smile attached. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. Right, heads up now, or heads down. I don't know the answer to this question. I've told you in the past, I don't know how interesting you find it when I pull back the curtain slightly on what we do together. A bit like Toto in The Wizard of Oz, isn't it? And I actually explain to you what I think the mechanics of our relationship sometimes are. I hope you find it interesting. If you don't, you must let me know, and I'll do it even more. When I really don't know the answer to a question, I have no way of knowing which way our conversation is going to go. Sometimes, I think I mentioned this to you yesterday, sometimes when I truly don't have a clue, I think back in the day, I might have pretended not to understand something in the hope of encouraging you to call in, but it often backfires that. So I truly don't have a clue. You've got nothing to bite on. So a strong opinion is often the best way to give you something to bite on. And happily, like most people who do this for a living, I have quite a lot of strong opinions. Oddly, maybe not as many as I used to, or certainly the ones that I do have may not be as strong as I used to. That moment of realization that there's no point having a mind if you never change it, being a crucial case in point. But if I truly haven't got a clue what the answer is to quite a straightforward question, to quite an outwardly straightforward question, it can go one of two ways. And I still, after all these years doing this job, I still don't know why. I still don't know what it is that determines whether or not the switchboard turns into a sort of Gobi desert of silence, or people queuing up to say largely meaningless and banal things, or when I confess to you that I haven't got a clue what the answer to a question is, it prompts a veritable cornucopia of quality. You queue up to provide plausible, interesting, illuminating, and quite often unexpected answers to the question that I've asked. And I have no knowledge of what makes the difference. I don't know what it is, whether or not I do anything different in those moments. Like on a good day, I get it right, and we get scenario 2. And on a bad day, the same question, I just get it wrong somehow, and we get scenario 1. Tumbleweed was the word I was looking for a moment ago. I don't know. And I never will, I don't think. It's the alchemy of the time we spend together, because this is a relationship, right? And there is no objective algorithm for relationships. There is no to-do guide to fix things or to make things perfect. There is no perfect relationship, although I think you and I come pretty close to that on a good day. There is no perfect relationship, which means that some of it is a bit like we talked about why some words are funnier than others. You can do the same joke, but with a slightly different word. Some people are funnier than others. You give the same words to somebody and they will be the funniest thing you've ever heard. And then you give the same words to somebody else and you coach them on how to say them, and you won't even raise a titter in a room. Peter Kay, for example, could probably read a shopping list and bring tears of laughter. I had a lovely full disclosure yesterday with John Coulshaw, and we talked a little bit about this. And he, like me, I mean, much more than me, just worshipped the ground that the late Les Dawson worked on. Les Dawson, a wonderful example. Somebody who could raise an eyebrow and bring a house down. Whereas often for the rest of us, we can strain desperately to tell what we think is a brilliant joke, but something goes a little bit wrong in the telling and it doesn't even raise a titter, let alone bring the house down. So it's the same sort of alchemy. Now, I ask you a question I don't know the answer to. Some days it propels us into wonderful territory where we learn from and engage with and challenge each other. And other days we ask a question that I don't know the answer to and nobody else does either. And the people who think they do know the answer turn out to be even more boring than the people who don't. So anyway, in for a penny, in for a pound, eh? Here is the question. I've touched on it before. I have some thoughts on it, but I don't think they're going to really fill the whole gap created. So, a couple of stories that I'm reading today, okay? UK and EU should pool defence spending. This is the notion that European countries should coordinate their defence spending in the same way that US states do at the federal level in order to both, I suppose, maximise spending power and therefore create a more meaningful force. This could come up in the Brexit reset negotiations that are likely, the defence deal is likely to be part of them when they kick off on the 19th of May. And there have already been suggestions that this could pave the way to the UK joining a European security programme. We also know that and there are all sorts of different phrases. So we've got a European security programme. Okay, have you got that? Have you written that one down? And now we've got a European reassurance force. So this would involve European boots on the ground in Ukraine. I would say that in the last 24 hours, that has become more likely than ever before. Why? Because the Mango Mussolini has made it pretty clear that he is going to withdraw the United States from their post-war position of prominence, their position as the post-war guarantor in many ways of peace in Europe, and instead throw his lot in with Vladimir Putin. He has become Vladimir Putin's blank. Reminds me, we must do a missing word round shortly. But he has become Vladimir Putin's blank. I think everybody, whether you're dressing it up in fancy words and writing editorials for the Wall Street Journal, or whether you're simply posting it on Blue Sky, I think we all know Donald Trump is Vladimir Putin's blank. And that means you need a reassurance force, and it will be European. Then there's a story on the front of the Times, which is a big worry, I would say. Britain is likely to abandon plans to send thousands of troops to protect Ukraine because the risks are deemed too high. One report in one newspaper, but it's a reputable journalist who gets a lot right. In an apparent softening of plans, she writes, Britain and Europe would no longer have a ground force guarding key cities, ports and nuclear power plants. And I mean, here is the madness of the whole situation, that by not doing that, Moscow might actually be more likely to sign up to a peace deal. So by removing the guarantors of a so-called peace deal, Moscow will be more likely to sign up to the peace deal. I mean, come on, Franz Kafka. Even he would probably balk at this as a stretch too far. So what are the terms of the peace deal? Well, we'll have a peacekeeping force in place to ensure that the peace deal succeeds. Yeah, but then we're not going to sign it. All right, how about if we take the peacekeeping force away, Mr. Putin? Then will you sign it? Yeah, that sounds good to me. A peace deal with no peacekeeping. Yeah, great. Yeah, you carry on, you Western schmucks. It's incredible, right? But all three of these stories, UK and EU should pool defence spending. A European reassurance force for Ukraine becomes more likely. And then contrasting that, risks of sending troops to Ukraine become too high. All speak to a conversation that we last had 10 years ago. And here is where I want you to put your thinking caps on. And here is where I throw the dice and hope that a question to which I don't have an answer is a question to which you have an interesting one. As far as I'm aware, the European Union, in its early days when it wasn't called that, certainly the vision of European Union that Winston Churchill held, saw this European Union, economic union, as the most promising guarantee that Germany and France would never go to war with each other again, that humanity could conceive of. So even the most cursory understanding of European history, post-Roman, probably even pre-Roman, but the most cursory understanding of European history teaches you that France and Germany, generally speaking, when at loggerheads, everybody suffers. Okay? Churchill's vision of the European Union, or of a European Union, whatever it became, very much saw the more integration and the more union there is, we're back to getting the eggs out of a baked cake. The more baked the European cake is, the harder it is to get the eggs out. And you have to get the eggs out to start lobbing them at each other. Needs a bit of work, that analogy, but it does the job. And that is why, of all the things, and we probably didn't focus upon this one because there was so much to get cross about or confused about, so many lies that it fell to us to puncture at the time. The lies about the NHS, the lies about immigration, the lies about the car industry, the lies about the fishing industry. Just, I don't know, buy Nigel Farage's autobiography or something if you need a full list of all the lies that were told in the context of leaving the European Union. There were so many that we didn't focus enough on this one. It got shouted down, didn't it, as Project Fear all the time. David Cameron suggested that there would be war on the continent of Europe again if we left the European Project Fear, but there is. And the biggest one for me looking back, the biggest mystery for me looking back, and you must remember this, was that we were supposed to be frightened, opposed to and spooked by a, quotes, European army, end quotes. Why? I haven't perhaps created the warmest of welcomes for people who believe that it would be a terrible thing. But I'd like you to tell me, if you can, if you used to think it would be a terrible thing and can't quite work out why or what led you to such, to me, a strange conclusion. I would really love to talk to you. What were we? So I'm asking half the country what were we supposed to be frightened of, and half the country what they were actually frightened of. What were we supposed to be frightened of when they started banging on about a European army? One of the few things that you didn't have to wait for the future to see the truth of. Even then you could have said, what's wrong with a European army? Listen, I'm no historian, but I'm pretty sure the armies you need to worry about are not the armies that you're in. The armies that you need to worry about are armies full of enemies. The armies that you're in, your armies, are not your problem. And I still don't get it. I still don't know why it was, A, a talking point at all, and B, an apparently effective one. Is it all about the Nazis? Is it all about somehow thinking the Germans are still our enemies and therefore we can't be in the same army as them? That's all I've got. It can't be that, can it? Why was it such an effective nonsense? Of all the Brexit nonsenses, possibly in international relations, one of the most effective. What exactly was that appealing to? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. UK and EU should pool defence spending. Of course they blooming should. I think the idea of not being united in the face of a common threat is absolutely bonkers. Donald Trump is taking his toys home. Donald Trump is abandoning Ukraine, abandoning Europe, demonising Europe, throwing his lot in with Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump is Vladimir Putin's blank. There is no doubt about it. So where does that leave Europe militarily? Up a creek without a paddle. So what do? We start building paddles. And the more paddles we got, the safer we'll be. The more canoes we've got, the safer we'll be, the better it will be. And unity, cooperation, whatever you want to call it, is obviously the answer to both current and future problems. So here it goes. Here's the question I really don't know the answer to. And I hope that you can provide some illumination. Why was or would be a European army be a bad thing? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. All right. 0345 6060 973. I will withhold judgment until the end of the hour on whether it's gone into category 1 or category 2. You'll be able to work it out pretty quickly, I imagine, but that is a call to arms for clever people. Why was the prospect of a European army used to scare and spook people in the Brexit debate when it is so obviously, so clearly and so currently a bloody good thing? It's 11:20.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11. You live in the 21st century, not the early 20th or even the mid 20th, and the threats that the world you live in face come largely from Russia. Why would you not unite with your nearest neighbours to create military resistance or military peacekeeping? It is a question that was used to great effect during the Brexit debate, and it's one that is still very difficult to answer, especially as the world recalibrates in the face of Donald Trump becoming Vladimir Putin's blank, and Europe recognises that there is strength in numbers. So why was it such an effective rhetorical device, if you like? Pud is in Hampton. Pud, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Yeah, we spoke before, so it's Prana Pud. We spoke before, but I want to thank you before I start, James. You made me change my mind about things, so thank you for that. So that helped me in my life. So thanks very much. But in terms of this particular question, right? Basically, the way I see it is right. I voted Brexit. Okay, the reason I voted Brexit at the time was my concerns about the Greek debt crisis. I felt the European Union was based just a pack of financial cards, and it would all go to disaster. And also, I had concerns about Le Pen in France. Okay, because I thought at some stage, you talk about the pendulum. I thought at some stage the pendulum would shift to the right in France, and she'd be in charge. What I didn't realise at the time was basically that Germany would start shifting right. But that's just a fashion, James. Everywhere at the moment in Europe, it appears to be all the big players are hurtling towards the right. So it's France, there's Germany, the big players. Already in Italy, you've got a fascist government there. And you want us to join that club. What's wrong with you? What is wrong with you, mate? I mean, you're a bright bloke.
So the reason not to have a European army to fight fascism is because there might be fascists on our side at some point in the future.
You talk about fascists on our side. Why would you want to join sides with a bunch of fascists? What's the matter with you?
But there aren't fascists in control in Germany. Many people would.
There will be soon, James.
But the Russian, but Vladimir Putin does fit that description pretty much perfectly. And so the idea that you don't join forces... No, let me speak, mate.
Go on then.
The idea that you don't join... It's all gone a bit category 1 already, hasn't it? But the idea that you don't join forces with your closest allies, your historical allies, because of a fear that they might become fascist in the future, at which point, of course, you could easily withdraw. But you don't join forces with them now to fight fascism. I have to finish the sentence, champ.
Go on.
You don't join forces with them now, people who aren't fascists, to fight actual fascists, because the people that aren't fascists might be fascists in the future, and therefore joining forces with them now to fight fascists would make me stupid.
There's a lot of fascists in there, in that sentence, James.
Yeah.
A lot of fascists.
A lot of logic as well, pal.
And there will be a lot of fascists in Europe.
Yeah.
So you just got to look ahead.
But I'm going to ask you the same question again. Why would you not join forces with non-fascists to fight fascists? Because they might be fascists in the future.
You know your analogy about getting...
Just answer the question, will you, Pod?
No, I'll answer the question, James.
Go on, then.
Mate. Yeah?
Go on, then.
No, it's only phones for a chat, mate. Don't turn nasty on me. Don't use your intellect to beat me down, mate. You can trigger me.
God forbid that I'd use my intellect to beat you down, Pod, but... I think that's category 1, category 2, 0. Stu's in Plymouth. The pressure's on, Stu. What would be the problem with a European army?
James, good to speak to you again.
Likewise.
Right, personally, we've already got a European army in NATO. We work closely together with all our NATO allies. That is a European army, and it works very well. Why it works well is because we're kind of stovepipe. We still work under our own chains of command within that structure. So we work with British staff officers at British formations and above, so eventually we get to a NATO headquarters. Now, in my experience when I was serving, when we worked in joint headquarters where you had soldiers and officers from all different nations, it actually caused more problems than it solved because of national political caveats and professionalism. I'm not decrying our European allies, but
you kind of are. But you're the one with military experience. You're the one with military experience, so you are of course allowed to. But NATO has had some fairly considerable successes over the years.
It works. It does work, but from the I can give you an example. There was a former. It was a kind of an experiment. It never actually deployed in, but there was a NATO headquarters, divisional headquarters. So you're talking around about 20,000 troops. The subordinate brigades that made up the division were kept under their own national structure, and they worked very well. But at the divisional headquarters, it sort of just unravelled and became all political.
But this is you're phoning in to answer the question: is NATO perfect?
NATO,
and I'm not having that. I'm not having that phone in. I'm not having that phone in. I mean, NATO is imperfect. The British Army itself is imperfect. I think that if you were a victim of ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Kosovo, you'd have nothing but warm words to say about NATO's intervention in the Balkans.
Exactly, and I agree, and that's why NATO is good, because it does work in that way. But if you then put the whole of the European Army under a single chain of command, where there is no national caveats involved, it wouldn't be as effective. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I kind of do, but I would see it in the current terms. I'd see it just as almost we're talking about NATO without America. And I know there are lots of other countries, lots of other...
not a bad thing, but...
well, I don't think it is a bad thing, and that's why I'm confused about how it became such a powerful rhetorical device in the run-up to Brexit. I mean, if you don't call it a European army, you call it a European peacekeeping force, everybody's fine with it. You don't call it a European army, you call it a European reassurance force. You talk about pooling defence spending. I can address all of your quibbles by simply saying it'll be more like NATO than whatever it is you're worried about. Why would it have made people vote against? Also, there'd be absolutely no compulsion to join it if we'd stayed in the European Union. But because there are countries in the European Union that are pacifist, that are historically very neutral. So why was it such an effective political weapon?
Because it was playing on xenophobic issues and pandering to Project Fear and things like that. I mean, I don't agree with it at all. I totally disagree with that sentiment. But that's what it was used for. It was a weapon, weaponizing information.
Sovereignty, is it? And no one used the word sovereignty until after they'd actually voted to leave, and then when they looked at what they'd voted for, they claimed they'd voted for sovereignty all along. But the idea that I wouldn't. Do you know? I've just remembered something. I think that the idea that I'd rather be on the deck of a sinking ship saluting a bridge full of Englishmen than be a member of the most powerful fleet in the history of humanity with a German and a Frenchman standing next to the Englishman on the bridge, that would offend the kind of sensibilities that you're describing. Not you, not me, but the people who've got a problem with the idea an Englishman should never take orders from a Frenchman, or an Englishman should never take orders from a German. I've taken orders
from officers from other armies. It's part of NATO, and it's not been a problem to me.
I know you. I'm talking about the people you're describing as xenophobic. I mean, how does xenophobia play in this particular space? And I think that's the answer. I would rather be on a sinking ship saluting a bridge full of fellow Englishmen while playing Rule Britannia sinks beneath the waves, than actually be part of an international army, an international unified union, European peacekeeping force. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Go back to 2016, and the president of the EC, Jean-Claude Juncker, responded to the election of Donald Trump. This is the kind of stuff you don't see very often in the UK media. The election of Donald Trump by saying this: the Americans to whom we owe so much will not ensure the security of the Europeans in the long term. We have to do this ourselves. That is why we need a new start in the field of European defence, up to the goal of setting up a European army. Wow. That was in 2016, after the first election of Donald Trump. Every single thing that Juncker predicted has come true. Now, if you were a British public figure absolutely dedicated to doing whatever Vladimir Putin dreams of, how would you respond to Jean-Claude Juncker's 10-year-old suggestion that Donald Trump signalled a change in America's relationship with European peace and necessitated more military cooperation from European companies? If you were a shilling for Vladimir Putin, how would you have responded to Jean-Claude Juncker's comments about a European army? I'll leave you to puzzle over that while I read you what Nigel Farage had to say at the time. You've got Jean-Claude Juncker using the election of President Trump as a means of trying to destroy NATO by pushing his ridiculous dream of a European army. Incredible, really, that 10 years later, he's still popping up, offering his opinions on everything from medical diagnoses to, you name it, really. And once again, being proved wrong about absolutely everything. And Jean-Claude Juncker proved absolutely right. That is exactly what Donald Trump has done. So presumably that means that Farage would now be in favour of a European army, because the reasons he gave for being opposed to them have turned out to be about as sound as all his other reasons for wanting to leave the European Union. So why was this particular item of rhetoric effective? Maybe it wasn't as effective as I think it was, but if you were to be judging it by quantity rather than quality, the amount of times it popped up, you'd have to conclude that they must have thought it was effective. Philip is in Hartlepool. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. A couple of things. We lack terrible education in this country. We don't know our history. No. We barely know our own. We don't know the history of Europe. So, I mean, when France and Germany got together and said, right, let's combine our coal and steel production, and then that means we don't have the ability to wage war with each other, because it's then independently organised and things. So that leads forward to the EEC, etc., as we know. But I think it comes down to the likes of Farage, the Tory press. It's the who won the blooming war. You know, we hate the French, we hate the Germans. We're told that. We're told we hate the French and we hate the Germans. Yeah. And the idea that of a Brussels, in their words, dominated by France and Germany, would then have our troops in their army was just hard to swallow. They couldn't stomach, the xenophobes couldn't stomach it, you know, the little Englanders and things. And so it was just a fantastic tool to run with as another reason why to get out.
It's another example of something that only works if you don't think about it too deeply and you don't really know much.
Yeah.
Because the European coal and steel community, 51 was it? 52? I mean, not long, really shortly after the end of the Second World War. And it wasn't just France and Germany, although they were the biggest players. Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands were in there as well. And the idea was, I mean, is if you think of them as eggs, to return to my favourite analogy, Philip, if you think of them as eggs, then the bigger the cake and the more eggs are in it, the harder it is to unbake. And so the idea of that then splitting up and starting to bite chunks out of each other again at some unspecified point in the future moves ever further out of reach, doesn't it?
So, because the other one, the argument was is that what has kept peace in Western Europe, not Europe as a whole, because obviously it was dominated by the Soviet Union on the eastern side.
Yes.
But what's kept peace in Western Europe, and the likes of Farage and Özil could say, oh, it's NATO. We don't need a European army because we've got NATO. Now, how did that work out then?
Well, he also then on a different day would blame NATO for Vladimir Putin going into Crimea, the politician he admires most in the world, going into Crimea in 2014. Would it work now? I keep referring back to something. I don't know if you've heard me mention it or if you read it yourself in The Economist. The Badgett column in The Economist couple of weeks ago posited or pointed out even that 2/3 of the people who have passed away since 2016 would have voted Brexit. And that attitude you describe, I think I have some sympathy for it. If you lost, for example, your dad in the Second World War, then you might find some of these things emotionally harder to swallow than the rest of us do. Would it work now? Looking at Putin and Ukraine in particular, the idea of much greater cooperation across the whole of Europe on a military front. Germany rearming and boasting about it is something that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, never mind 50. Would it work now, trying to do Putin's bidding on the concept of a European army? Would the usual shills and charlatans be able to get away with it again, do you think?
Well, it still dominates the press feed.
I don't know if it does. I don't know if it does. I mean, I'm looking at headlines today about UK and EU should pool defence. It doesn't seem to be accompanied by the pearl clutching and the fake patriotism that it was accompanied by 10 years ago. But neither of us know, really, do we?
I mean, there are obviously practicalities of the previous caller said about organisation and things. All I know is that when we left the EU. Putin revved up the tanks.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And there's that famous comment from the then ambassador about having successfully brought Britain to their knees. But hey-ho, some people either unaware of it or don't care. Philip, thank you. It's 20-12. Anthony is in Bletchley Park. Anthony is something of a sage when it comes to matters military, so hopefully you'll be very squarely in Category 2. Every caller since the first one, actually, has been in Category 2 of what happens when I throw open the phone lines to a question that I categorically cannot answer. So I take this as a win, Anthony. Pressure's on. Don't blow it. What do you want to say?
Nothing now. No,
carry on.
Yeah, James. Thank you and good morning. If you look at the requirements for effective international joint operations, they can be distilled down to what's called C4I: command, control, computers, communications, and intelligence. Then that needs to link to doctrine, it needs to link to interoperability, it needs to link to logistics, and it needs to link to strategy. Okay. So if you have all those 5 factors in play with the British Army successfully integrating inside the European Army, it wouldn't then take the brains of an archbishop to work out, well, hang on, if we're able to integrate carefully with the European Union on C4I, doctrine, interoperability, logistics and strategy, why is it we're now separating ourselves from education, freedom of movement, the economy and politics and geostrategy when we're actually saying, well, we can operate perfectly satisfactorily militarily? And of course, that fundamentally undermines Brexit, because the whole point about Brexit is we can stand alone. We do not need these pesky foreigners. Why do we want to work with them? We've got the greatest groundbreaking world-achieving education service. We have the NHS, which is the jealousy,
the envy of the world.
Envy of everybody, and all that other, I was going to swear then, all that other tosh.
Yes. Would anyone have thought that deeply about it, though? I mean,
I did.
Yeah, I know, but you didn't vote to leave. So in terms of the people that, let me read you, here's Robert in Idiot's Corner, actually. So Robert's in Basildon. He's put, here we go again, the James O'Brien echo chamber. Remember, Robert's been listening to the same programme that you have, criticising British people and praising Germans, French, etc. Why do you have such contempt for the British people, James? Asked Robert. I don't know. I have contempt for idiots, Robert, whether it's you in Basildon or whether it's someone called flipping, I don't know, Fritz, calling me from Hamburg.
All I would say to Robert is that if he, like I have, has served in the Ace Rapid Reaction Corps and done Kosovo, Bosnia, Sarajevo, and all kinds of other things.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, Anthony,
yes.
And I'm going to suggest that he probably hasn't.
I think he probably hasn't. Add Robert from Basildon, and greetings, Robert from Basildon. You're entitled to your opinion, however wrong it might be.
Of course.
If you actually had been in those organisations, you've seen how effectively the Europeans and indeed the Americans were capable to operate together. That would give the lie to this whole nonsense that a European army is not desirable. And given what the Americans are now doing, having sort of departed the trajectory of planet Earth and planet reality simultaneously, actually, I think joining a European defence forum, however you want to describe it, whichever three-letter acronym you want to come up with, is actually a tremendously good idea.
It's almost obviously brilliant, or if not brilliant, then necessary, because of all the other things. The things, oddly, I didn't know that until I looked it up during the last break, that Jean-Claude Juncker was predicting as far ago as long ago as 2016. Well, I have you with that CV. What about objections? Here's a good one. This is from Nick, and it's nicely expressed. He just says, in the past, whenever the idea of a European army was mooted, I was sceptical. I've lived in Italy for over 20 years, and my doubts were based on my perceived quality of their military from largely anecdotal information. But I really do believe that the world has changed, and we all need to join forces.
Well, I work with, if you turn specifically to Italy, I had the pleasure of working with Italian staff officers in the Ace Rapid Reaction Corps. And also I had the pleasure of working with the Alpini Brigade from the Italians when we were in Kosovo. And not only were they outstanding soldiers, they were the only people who turned up on the battlefield and gave you an espresso, a 3-course lunch, a glass of red wine, and then said, now let's go and deal with the uppity Serbs. Yeah. Now, this has real style.
Oh, wow.
They were fantastic.
And the more cooperation there is, the more rough edges and areas of friction would be rubbed away, of course. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with the military domain is that people who are outside it tend to look at it as a goldfish bowl.
Yeah.
And their ability to perceive what is the reality of that goldfish bowl is inevitably clouded by what they see on the big screens or the small screens or on social media. But the gritty day-to-day, the quotidian life of soldiers, officers, ministries of defence, it's far more pragmatic than people would have you think. They do work together. They try to make things work.
Yes.
And that's the whole point. A military operation is nothing more than trying to make things work to achieve an objective. And of course, that again undermines the whole Brexit argument, because God help us, why would Britain want to help the Europeans? Because that's why we want to leave them, because we don't want to work with them, because we hate them for undisclosed reasons.
And in 2016, of course, the kind of the quislings and the shills and the charlatans who would be opposed to this idea, and you could easily argue that it hadn't quite arrived, the time of necessity hadn't arrived in 2016, they would have been saying that America are our friends, we don't need Europe. And now Donald Trump has made it categorically clear that they're not. Everything changes. Do you reckon, and this is theory rather than experience and knowledge,
sure.
And I think you're right to suggest that just don't call it an army. To smuggle it past the hard of thinking, just don't call it an army, call it something else. Don't call it freedom of movement, call it liberty of motion, call it a European security force. Do you think the same traitorous voices would be effective now as they were in 2015? Because Putin would sponsor them. Putin would be absolutely furious about the prospect of enhanced European military cooperation. We know that.
Absolutely. And I think that, to answer your question simply, I think that there will be far fewer voices against it now. And I think that's because there is a substantial body of thinking that recognises that people like Trump and his ilk are fundamentally strategically dangerous. And therefore, if you're going to be serious about protecting the UK, which one hopes the government is, and also the citizens inside it. You have to take a much more clear-eyed and measured view about what it is you need to do to protect this country. And what you need to do to protect this country is to integrate it into a European Defence Force that is able to protect not only the UK mainland, but also the European continent from any acts of aggression. And if anybody honestly thinks that Putin is going to stop at Ukraine, well, I suggest they have a chat to the Estonians, the Poles and Lithuanians and get their view on it, because I can guarantee, having spoken to people in all those countries, they are looking east very worriedly, and therefore any talk that can build on the idea of cooperative defence has got to be applauded and also has got to be rebroadcast. It's a no-brainer.
Well, you'd have thought so. And, of course, no brains brings us back to Robert in Basildon. Or him, yes. Thank you, Anthony. Anthony there, playing up front for Category 2 callers and smashing in a hat-trick just before half-time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 minutes to 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Anthony mentioned Italy quite a lot, and it is to Italy that we cross. Well, to Rome at least. I don't know whether Shelagh Fogarty is in the Vatican City or not, but certainly in the environs of Italy, and she joins me now because you are there for the Pope's funeral, Shelagh. I presume that it's already action stations. It's already an extraordinary place to be.
Oh, it absolutely is, yeah. I mean, from the moment Pope Francis died, people will have been starting their journeys here. And lots of people were here. I mean, it's a fantastic tourist city as much as anything else, so people are always here, particularly once the weather starts to get better in the spring. But it's also a Jubilee year in the Catholic Church. They happen every 25 years, and a lot of people come to Rome throughout the year for that as well. So it was already busy. But this morning we went down to, yes, the edges of the Vatican City. We can't go into the Vatican City, as in into the Basilica at this stage, unless we're part of that queue to see the Pope lying in state, because they're preparing it and the outside of it for the service tomorrow. But even this morning, James, when I came down at about 6 o'clock UK time, because we needed to sort out accreditation in just on the edges of St. Peter's Square, there were already substantial crowds being guided in that queue, and it was snaking around, really long queue, but a bit like when the Queen died, and there was that 15-hour queue, but moving steadily and in really good humour as well, which is lovely. But even in the hours since then, it has really started to swell, that crowd, and they've opened up 2 new avenues into that queue into St. Peter's. So they know that this is the final day that people can do that, and the Pope will remain inside the Basilica until his funeral tomorrow morning. But I imagine around 8-9 o'clock tonight they'll stop that procession.
And I mean, we have seen papal funerals before. When it comes to the rubric and the rigmarole, this will follow a well-established pattern.
It will, although Pope Francis did instigate a couple of changes. Although Pope Benedict's and Pope John Paul II's funeral, which I covered, the latter, the coffin was very simple wooden coffin. But they used to be a lot more elaborate than that. So the simplicities have already begun, but his papacy was very much, the sort of watchword of his papacy was an attempt to communicate simplicity. There's nothing simple, as you well know, about the Catholic Church internationally, but, in terms of how he addressed people and approached people. So, but in terms of the rigmarole and the ceremony and the beauty of it, I mean, if people are into that kind of thing, they're in for a treat, because it'll be beautiful music, beautiful liturgy in probably 4 different languages: Latin, Italian, Spanish, and a smattering of English. But who knows with Francis, he might have asked for something on top of that we don't know about yet. So we'll find out in the morning.
Speaking of our shared Catholicism, I hope you'll indulge this question, albeit that it tempts you away from professional objectivity. While you're there, doyenne of broadcasting, queen of outside broadcast, all of
Doesn't doyenne just mean old these days?
No, but on the contrary. How close to the surface of Shelagh Fogarty, the journalist, today is Shelagh Fogarty, the little Liverpudlian girl in her Holy Communion dress?
You've seen my Instagram account, haven't you?
I haven't, actually.
Have you not?
No, I don't know.
Because I put a photograph of little Shelagh Fogarty, age 7, in her Holy Communion dress and veil. I really did this morning. I put it up and said, I did. We're in sync, James. We're in sync. Two little Catholics in sync together.
So the answer is pretty near the surface.
The answer is pretty near the surface. But I put a photograph up on Instagram of me in my Holy Communion rigmarole, and I said, this toothless little girl will be in Rome for you this weekend with LBC and Global, and broadcasting throughout the next 48 hours to bring you every detail. But you're right, it is close to the surface, but there's a great deal to talk about the ceremony, about the people, the sense of, even though it's about a funeral, there's a sense of quiet festival about these moments as well in Catholicism, because of course Christianity is, if it's about anything, it's about hope. So it's not too mournful. Obviously it will be different tomorrow morning during the service, but there's a great deal of warmth around the place as well, which is lovely to sort of soak in.
That's lovely. Shelagh Fogarty, thank you. Live from Rome, as we say, where Shelagh is both reporting on and preparing for the funeral tomorrow of Pope Francis. And Shelagh, of course, will be with you in her usual slot from 1 o'clock today. And we hop now, as this programme increasingly seems to be doing in international terms, from Rome to Kyiv, because Theo is there. Theo is a journalist on the ground who we've spoken to a few times recently, and who's here to steer us back to the question about why the prospect of a European army, which seems like a blooming good idea in the current context, was such an effective propaganda tool for Brexit supporters just 10 short years ago. Theo, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Hello, how are you?
Hello, mate. Very well. How are you doing?
Not bad. Well, I don't know how much I have to add from your previous callers, as I agree with basically everything they said. It was an emotive issue. Sovereignty is an emotive thing that's quite easy to manipulate people with. And those doing the manipulating recognize that military integration is perhaps the greatest step a confederation like the EU can take towards becoming a full federated state, United States of Europe.
Which was another great scare tactic that was deployed during those debates.
Yeah. And, the person on the Eurasian continent who would likely hate it the most is Vladimir Putin, of course.
Well, you say, of course. Briefly, remind us why.
Why? Because he wants to reintegrate the Russian Empire. And that involves invading rather a number of EU countries.
And that means that the more effective any resistance to those ambitions, the more his plans would be frustrated or stymied. I mean, you describe it, and I know it's obvious to you, but you describe it in terms so obvious that you wonder how anybody, particularly anybody in public life in this country, could go about shilling for Vladimir Putin's imperial ambitions without realising it, if you see what I mean.
I don't know how many don't realise it.
No, nor do I. It's a question for the ages, isn't it? I've accidentally ended up on Vladimir Putin's side in a European war. I've accidentally ended up admiring Vladimir Putin more than any other leader in the world, even as he undertakes illegal invasions. While I have you, Theo, how is... I mean, we did this yesterday, but I'd be interested in your perspective on the apparent now abandonment of Ukraine by Donald Trump's administration, the cozying up to the point of alliance with the Kremlin. How is that being processed by the Ukrainian people that you're coming into contact with?
Betrayal.
Really?
I was watching on Wednesday night the very heavy attack that hit Kyiv. I saw the Patriots going up to intercept the ballistics. Every time I saw one, I thought, well, that's not going to be replaced. And then I went to the impact site where it killed, I think now the number's gone up to 12 people, including 3 children. And it was a block that Europeans the continent over would recognize. Mid-rise buildings, the park in the middle, completely civilian area. And those missiles, they have a circular error probable. That is, they will hit within about 15 to 30 meters half the time. They are accurate, and it was hit with a ballistic. So it was aimed. There's no doubt about that in my mind.
And I think the subtext of what you're saying is that speaks of an emboldened Russia.
Yeah, well, they launched 66 missiles, about 150 Shaheeds. I did the calculations. Now, these are, back of the notebook calculations, right?
Sure.
So not that accurate, but about $250 million worth of munitions on Wednesday night. While these quote-unquote negotiations are going on, thumbing his nose at Trump, and he knows he can do it.
Yeah.
Because all Trump's going to do is get on Truth Social and say, Vladimir, stop.
Yeah.
It's utterly meaningless.
I'm sorry that you're in a position to answer that question so comprehensively. How can people find out more about the work that you're doing while you're in Kyiv, Theo?
So I have a Substack that's Dictators v. Democrats. I do regular updates on there. I wrote and I took some photographs from the Impact site on Thursday morning, and I write regular updates there, as well as writing about the war against democracy globally.
Theo Althorpe Mullis, to give you your full name, thank you very much for calling in today. Calling in today from, as you've gathered, Kyiv itself, where that I didn't know the death toll had gone up to 12. 3 children dead. The latest atrocity committed by the world leader, of course, that Nigel Farage admires most in the world. It is 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12, and we're about to have a rather gentler conversation. But just a quick word before that. I don't know how much attention you were paying to what Theo said. I imagine your ears pricked up, given the urgency of his contribution from Kyiv itself. But that image, that picture he painted of watching the ballistics go up to intercept Russian missiles coming into Ukraine, many of which, as he explained, would have been very deliberately targeted at civilians, which is a war crime, and knowing that they wouldn't be replaced. I don't know that I've heard the Patriot missiles he described intercepting the Russian ballistics. I don't know that I've heard a more visceral description of what Donald Trump's abandonment, betrayal of Ukraine will mean. But to sit there, to stand there in a war zone, watching the invaded party, watching the attacked party, watching the victim of an illegal invasion, resisting a barrage, resisting a bombardment with weapons provided by their ally in the United States, knowing that the United States is no longer an ally. And knowing, and that was really stark, wasn't it, that description, knowing that the Patriot missiles, as everyone is fired and successfully intercepts a Russian ballistic, knowing that it won't be replaced. I don't know, I honestly don't know if I've ever come across a more self-contained paradox. The idea that what you witness when you see a Patriot missile intercept successfully a Russian missile heading for Kyiv, you are simultaneously seeing success and defeat in a single moment. It is a successful interception, and it is evidence of the betrayal, at least, if not the potential defeat. Incredible stuff, and evidence once again of how somehow this programme has ended up attracting callers of quite incredible quality, with a few exceptions, of course, on this occasion from Hampton, of all places. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. Let me turn your attention next to an altogether different story. I mean, part of me responds to this by saying, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Ted Sarandos is the co-chief executive of the streaming giant Netflix. And he has addressed this as much to directors as to you and me, saying that directors should stop thinking in terms of cinema audiences. He says, folks grew up thinking, I want to make movies on a gigantic screen and have strangers watch them and have them play in the theatre for 2 months and people cry and sold out shows. It's outdated. He's describing the cinema essentially as old hat. And listen, whether you like it or not, he has a point. But whether you like it or not, you have probably in recent years found yourself thinking, oh, I'll wait till that streams, and the wait is incredibly short. I think Conclave, which I didn't actually get around to watching, but Conclave for me, you can watch the real life version in the coming weeks, of course, but Conclave for me was the film when I couldn't quite believe how quickly it was going to be streaming. When I looked into going to see it at the cinema, I couldn't quite believe how quickly it was going to be streaming, and so I didn't go and see it at the cinema. I didn't get around to it. I saw a film yesterday. I don't know that it would even work on a television screen. It seemed to me to be a film of such obvious cinematic heft that I can't quite, and I've got a big telly, like most people these days. And you can turn all the lights off and make yourself some popcorn, and you can have a cinematic experience at home. But this film was probably the most cinematically specific, or specifically cinematic, whichever phrase works best for you, that I've seen in a very long time. I don't even know whether I liked it or not. It was such an incredible assault upon the senses. It's called Warfare. It's Alex Garland's latest. The guy that did the guy that wrote The Beach 100 years ago, the novel that the Leonardo DiCaprio film was based on. But I think most recently he made the film Civil War, and he has co-written and co-directed this film with an Iraq War veteran, and it follows a sniper team in Iraq that come under serious bombardment. It's in entirely real time. From the moment they arrive on the streets, on the Iraqi streets, charged with occupying a house in which to set up a base of operations, to the very end of the film, it unfolds in entirely real time. And there are moments where it is one of the most boring films I've ever watched, because guess what? Sitting in a apartment block in Iraq, waiting for things to happen, is really boring. But then, of course, they do happen, and that is when the assault upon your senses unfolds. And something about I mean, no spoilers involved. It's not really that kind of film. Obviously, there are explosions. One in particular will have you jumping about 1.5 foot out of your seat, especially as if in the preceding minutes you'd succumbed to the temptation to almost nod off. It's a bit like watching Beckett, but without the dialogue. I mean, nothing happens, which I think a famous critic said about Waiting for Godot. And I cannot imagine, and I love the cinema, I cannot imagine that film reaching the parts that it reached with me yesterday if I hadn't seen it on a big screen. Not just on a big screen, but actually with the state-of-the-art modern sound system in place as well. And I recently went with my oldest to see Gladiator on a 35mm print at the Prince Charles Cinema in Leicester Square, which unfortunately property developers are threatening the future of. If you ever get the chance to go there, most cities, big cities, have got a few art cinemas, but the Prince Charles is unique in many ways. It's a brilliant place for proper cineasts. And that was a magical experience, watching the 35mm version of Gladiator. I love the cinema, and I'm lucky enough, I get paid enough to go a lot. And actually, I go to the cinema in Chiswick, and I'm lucky enough sometimes not even to have to pay. So delighted are they to see me. So I am in a position of epic privilege when it comes to talking about the cinema. The Chiswick Cinema is a lovely spot to go, and we've got a new one in Brentford as well, which is part of the Everyman Cinema chain, which I think perhaps points to the future of cinema. Because it is an event. You go to an Everyman or a Picture House or the Chiswick Cinema, and you can have a drink in really classy surroundings. At some of them, you can have a lovely meal. They may even serve food at some of these cinemas now. The electric cinemas and other cities have their versions where they'll serve you a burger and a cocktail at your actually in the cinema just before the film starts. So that is a different proposition. In what they would call, probably in dreadful 21st century lingo, they would call it the hospitality offer. The hospitality offer at a cinema. The gulf between the Prince Charles, where the carpets are sticky, and the Everyman Cinema, where you can have a pina colada and a cheeseburger delivered to your seat while you're watching the trailers. The difference is absolutely enormous. But they're both cinema. And yet this man has a point. Global box office is, on its knees in many ways. The consumer, according to this bloke from Netflix, is saying, what is the consumer saying? He asks that they'd like to watch movies at home. So I know now that most people can't afford to go to the cinema. There are many people. There are deals in place, and there are special offers as well, and you go on the right time, go on the right night, join, but that costs money, and then it's actually cheaper over there. It's like Vimes's Boots all over again, isn't it? So I find this story simultaneously irresistible and depressing, because I think he's probably right. and I don't really want him to be, but this reminds me of my friend the greengrocer. And here's a little test of how much attention you pay to this programme. Why does this story remind me of my friend the greengrocer? Anyone? Keith? Nope. This story reminds me of my friend the greengrocer because when I moved to Chiswick, I made friends with a greengrocer called Andreas, who was an absolutely top bloke and now plies his trade from an incredible shop and restaurant in Chelsea Green, on Kale Street, in fact. The restaurant is called Kale Street, but like a genius, he spells it with a K because he's a greengrocer, and it's on Kale Street with a C. And I'll tell you what, if you want to eat food that just makes your taste buds kick up and say thank you, thank you, thank you, then check out this restaurant. That's not the point. He used to have a greengrocers on Turnham Green Terrace in Chiswick. And when he announced it was closing, he was bombarded with pleas to stay open and messages of sympathy. And what he told me is that he could almost, because he's got one of those memories, he could almost pinpoint precisely when the person dropping by to commiserate over the imminent closure and plead with him to reconsider, he could almost pinpoint when they had last come into the shop. And in some cases, it had been the previous Christmas to buy a bunch of mistletoe, because almost everybody was buying their fruit and veg from somewhere else, from supermarkets most obviously, or from other traders. So the idea, we love you and we really want you to stay open. You're part of the furniture, you're part of the community, you're absolutely essential, we've always loved you, but you haven't actually gone in there and spent any money. And I suspect the same might be true of cinemas. I think the same might be true of your reaction now to the idea of cinemas being dead within our lifetime, with a couple of glorious, arty, foodie, hospitality offer exceptions. The model of the modern cinema is dead. It's just a question of how long it's going to take to finally disappear. I have never wanted to be wrong so much, but the more you think about it, especially with the greengrocer angle, the more you agree with me. Don't you? So let's do some poetry today. Let's talk about why, for the uninitiated, think about your age. There'll be loads of people listening to this who haven't really had a relationship with cinema like you have had, who have done almost all of their viewing on streaming platforms or smaller screens. Why? And this is where I don't actually want poems. I'm using poetry as a figure of speech. Do never, ever, ever ring this program with poems. The day I start letting you read out your poems on this program is the day that phoning it in wouldn't even come close to describing my attitude towards presenting. So no poems. You can text me one if you absolutely must, but it's highly unlikely that I'll read it, let alone read it out loud. I want poetry. I want poetry in prose. I want you to describe the magic of cinema in ways that people who don't have a deep experience of it will appreciate. I want to know how you do it. And I've noticed on my text, people have started using AI. And I will never read out messages that appear to have been put together by AI. And I grant you that there'll come a point where I probably won't be able to tell, but I can at the moment, so you're wasting all our time, your own and mine, and Mr. AI's. 2 questions. He's right, isn't he? However much it offends our delicate cinematic sensibilities, there's no way cinema can survive in its current form. There's no earthly way you're going to start paying 10, 15, 20 quid to go and watch a movie when you can wait a month and it's going to pop up on your telly. 0345 6060 973. Question number 2, in a way, is why is that a tragedy? What will we lose when we lose our cinemas? And I hope we don't. And I think some of the ones I've described will survive, but the modern multiplex, the modern movie house, if it's not providing, it's a bit like retail. When we've had conversations about why shops are disappearing from our high streets, and the people who know what they're talking about queue up to tell us, you've got to provide more than a shop. You've got to provide an experience these days. You've got to provide a moment. There are so many calls upon our cash and our time and our attention. You've got to provide more than just what you got provided with 10, 20, 30 years ago. And cinemas can do that with wait to serve, a table service and wonderful food and drink in the space and amazing decor and no sticky carpets. Feels more like a New York speakeasy than it does like the old flea pits of our childhood. But why? Why is it so different and so magical? 0345 6060 So I've got a downbeat question and an upbeat question. Number one, looking at your life, looking at the sector, looking at the market, looking at your recent behaviour, can you really look me in the eye and tell me that this Netflix head honcho is wrong? That cinema is old hat? And question number two, the upbeat one, why is it so lovely? Why is it so special? Why is it worth fighting for? It's 12:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12 is the time, and we may, but I think it would be victim to recency bias, don't you? Because you talk about the moment in a cinema that you know could not have happened at home. What moment would it be? If you're just joining us, one of the heads of Netflix has said that cinema is old hat. He's come pretty close to saying it's dead. Directors shouldn't be making films for the cinema anymore. The idea that you're going to be sitting in a dark room with a bunch of strangers and staying there for hours and the film will stay on show in the same cinema for months. He's probably right. Elements of that do sound doomed. But you know and I know that there have been moments in the cinema that were so powerful, so magical, that you could never in a million years have experienced them at home. However brilliant your sound system, however enormous your screen, however silent your family and your pets, however authentic the popcorn, it just would not have happened. But I don't know if we would suffer from recency bias. I may throw down that gauntlet shortly because I'm struggling to think past the moment a bomb went off in the film that I saw yesterday, because it was so loud and so out of the blue and so... I can't even find the words to describe it. That I know that if I'd been watching it at home, I may even have been looking at my phone when it went off, so it wouldn't have had anything like the impact or the heft that it had in a cinema. It had to happen in a cinema. But I don't know if we'd all suffer too much from recency bias to throw that question open more broadly. Let's go to Wales. Jack's in Aberystwyth. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello, Jack.
I completely agree with you that you can't experience some of the magic that you get from the cinema that you can get at home. One moment, there's only been a couple of moments that I've been sat there with a massive grin on my face while watching a movie. And the very first time that I can remember watching that was the film Logan, the noir superhero movie about Wolverine.
Oh, yes.
And just watching Logan become this, go back to his old roots and also knowing the history of how much Wolverine had been destroyed by cinema in the past and so on, of not actually respecting his roots. It was amazing to experience.
But why did it have to be in a cinema?
Because of the sound. Firstly, the sound system is as you said, there is no sound system that can compete with a cinema sound system and the big screen, the moment that you're in. Because that's the other thing. For cinema, when you go into a cinema, you are focused, you are locked in. You sit in the cinema because there's nothing else around you apart from that screen and the sound around you.
Most of us are. I mean, some people will, and this isn't what we're doing on today's phone-in, so don't ring in to tell me how annoyed you get by people who don't behave in cinemas or people who are looking at their phones, because everybody knows they shouldn't be, and they are not the reason. Yeah. They are not the reason why cinema is struggling. They might be the reason why you don't go anymore, but the massive question of why it's struggling is much more existential than just a few people misbehaving. Because everything you say is true, and yet you also recognise that the writing is on the wall. It's weird, isn't it?
I think that the writing's on the wall for a couple of points. One of the main points that I've noticed over the past few years has been the utter lack of actual decent writing. What was the most recent film that was taken over the cinema and was on show in cinemas 20 times? Snow White. How bad was that movie? God awful. It was utterly, utterly terrible. And it isn't for the reasons where people will say of the actress or anything. It was just terrible writing.
But go back a year and you've got Oppenheimer and Barbie on at the same time.
Exactly, that's the thing though. But the thing is, though, Barbie and Oppenheimer, it's too few and far between. There is, it's like for every.
But they're not making fewer films. I mean, are they? Are we sounding?
I'm not saying they're making fewer films. I'm saying they're making fewer like original IPs or like good ideas and good writing. If you look at Disney, for example, what does Disney do now? They just do reboots.
Yeah.
They just reboot everything, and it's been successful financially for them. But a lot of people are now getting very sick and tired of seeing, oh, Peter Pan's been rebooted. Oh, we're rebooting Mulan. Oh, we're rebooting this one. Like, if you actually have what was the most successful movies during the 90s? Original ideas. Lion King was an original idea, obviously based on Hamlet. But the animation.
Yeah, hang on, whoa! You can't just do that. You can't say Lion King was an original idea. Lion King was an original idea. Well, all right, originally based on Hamlet, but I know what you mean. It was an original film.
Yeah, it was an original film that is like that.
Hamlet was based on Hamlet. To be fair to you, was based on something that beyond Hamlet. I mean, it was. There's no new stories under the sun, but there are new films that feel new, that are new, that aren't remakes or reboots or reimaginings. Yes, why?
The cinemas.
Why not? You sound like this is your livelihood rather than just your hobby.
The amount of times I will go onto the View website or go onto Odeon and so on, you will find films like Snow White are given 20 to 30 viewings a day.
Yeah.
But then you see a film like some of the A24 movies and stuff like that. A24 makes the best movies, in my opinion, right now. And I recommend everybody goes out and sees A24 produced movies because they are amazing. But they're only given 2 or 3 time slots a day.
Yeah, but I mean, that's chicken and egg. I know I use that phrase too much, but the calculation is that everyone will want to go and see Snow White, and just because on this occasion they didn't, doesn't mean that the calculation is wrong. But you're right, there's a timidity, isn't there? There's an attempt to find a formula and then fit to it. I'm looking at the top 10 films of the 1990s, actually, because that was the decade that you chose.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly illustrative of what you describe. In fact, further down you go, there's 1 or 2 sequels. There's 1 prequel. Can you guess what the prequel was?
Oh, God. Now you're testing my knowledge.
You're the expert, Jack. It's quite obvious.
God.
It's quite obvious.
Quite obvious.
Yeah. Massive prequel. Historical prequel.
Oh, Star Wars.
Yes, Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
But also, again, like if you watch a Star Wars Phantom Menace, yes, it's a prequel, but the idea is pretty unique.
No, I agree with you. So Titanic, biggest film of the 90s, then the Star Wars prequel, then Jurassic Park, which ticks every imaginable box for a blockbuster, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Independence Day, Lion King, Forrest Gump, Sixth Sense, the Jurassic Park sequel, same decade, that's not a massive surprise, Men in Black and Armageddon.
Yeah. And then if you look at the 2010s, every single film in the 2010s, I guarantee was a Marvel movie.
But didn't you start with a Marvel movie?
It was a noir movie taken. It was like fair enough.
I'm joshing because the genre movies can be brilliant. But you're right. I mean, that's why I double checked. That is extraordinary. Home Alone comes in at 17. That's one of my favourite films. Since becoming a parent, it's one of those films that has a second life, a third life. So I don't know though, Jack. Thank you. Do you? I did ask. Do you do this for a living, or do you just go and watch a lot of films?
I would call myself an amateur film critic. I go to the cinema as much as I can to watch new movies and stuff like that.
And do you post about them?
I post about them on a website called Letterboxd.
There you go. A free advert, mate. No charge. And what should people look for? Should they look for you specifically, or do you just want them to look at the whole website?
I think they just need to look at the whole website because Letterboxd it's better than IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes when it comes to film criticism.
I invite you to do that because your enthusiasm is infectious, and you like me can love cinema while also recognising the plausibility of this rather grim analysis. Thank you, Jack. Take care. Carlos is in Bridport. Carlos, what made you pick up the phone?
Just on this, what's good to go to the cinema and watch something at home. I had a recent experience actually. I don't know if you know Sight and Sound Film Magazine.
Yes, I do. Is it still going?
Yes, it's brilliant. But every 10 years they get critics around the world to vote for the best film of all time, and it's been Citizen Kane, it's been Vertigo, and the recent one, 10-year one last year was, or the year before I think, was Jean Dielman, which is quite a small film from Belgium in the mid-70s that runs at 3 hours 13. Now, at the time I watched it, I hadn't heard of the film, and I thought, wow, why has this been voted the best film of all time?
Yes.
So I watched it on a streaming platform, on the BFI streaming platform, and it's a film about a housewife in a flat in Brussels, just going about her day. She does entertain clients in between making soup and things like that,
right.
And it's almost like a one-person perspective. You know, not a lot of dialogue, very slow moving. As I said, 3 hours 20 minutes long. And I watched it at home and I just couldn't get into it. I was just distracted so easily. And then I went to see it at the Prince Charles on a 35mm print, and I was transfixed.
How amazing. Why? Can we put it into words? I'm not sure we can.
Because, you know, it's a film that deserves that attention because of, you know, our attention deficit these days. We're so easily distracted. And when you're in the cinema and it's on a big screen and it's close up and you're almost transferred into that living room or into that flat with the titular character, and you just get...
But this, in a way, I think every call is going to do this thing that I've done and Jack has done and now you're doing, is that we think the bloke is probably right and we wish that he wasn't. Because he is saying that directors shouldn't be thinking in those terms anymore. They shouldn't be thinking in terms of cinema audiences. And that director clearly was.
Yes.
And yet, for commercial or whatever reasons you want to offer, they probably shouldn't be in future. It's a 1975 film. That's Chantal Akerman. I've never even heard of it, and I thought I was pretty up on this kind of thing.
Look, I'm like you. I like cinema, and I hadn't heard of it until Sight and Sound released it. But you know, it's an event. It's only every 10 years.
That's right.
It's very well revered. So I took the opportunity to watch it on the small screen, and then subsequently...
And it didn't land, it didn't, because it sucked you in a way that it could not do in your own sitting room, even with the best sound system and the biggest... Well, mate, I mean, if you've got a genuine home cinema, then you can probably plug in the same way, but... There's something about a cinema. It's going though, isn't it, Carlos? There'll be some will. It is going. He's not wrong. The model is withering.
Yes, yeah, but I think that's to do with audiences. It's not about... I don't think it's necessarily about accessibility, that you can watch it at home. I think it's about costs and also people's attention. They just can't bring themselves to be cut off from their social media for more than 5 minutes.
You're right to bring in a conversation we had in the first hour, relevant to the second hour. If Jonathan Haidt is right, I said no poems this hour, but if Jonathan Haidt is right, don't be tight. I guess I might. If Jonathan Haidt is right, then it would be evidence of the younger generation being unable to do things now because of the relationship they have with the instant distraction and instant gratification of social media. So I don't know. Jack didn't sound like an old git. I'm not suggesting for a minute that Carlos did, but I think I do. I wonder how this conversation reaches the ears of younger people. It'd be like, all right, Grandad, you go down the cinema. I'll be watching Netflix while simultaneously on my iPad chatting with my mates, and I'll probably make a couple of phone calls at the same time as well, or at least record some voice messages. It's 12:32. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 25 to 1. You're listening to, like the man said, James O'Brien on LBC. It's a horrible one, isn't it? Because you know he's right, and you really don't want him to be. And there's no earthly way that cinema is going to disappear completely. But here's the subtext of what we've been discussing so far, Jack and Carlos and me and the text that I've read out. Because what the Netflix honcho is saying is that directors should stop thinking in terms of cinema audiences. And that means that films will change. So like a Francis Ford Coppola thinks exclusively in terms of cinema audiences. And the bloke from Netflix is right. That is not going to happen anymore. You'd be daft, given what a tiny part of the financial outlay is likely to be recouped from a cinema release. You're almost painting with colours that no one can see. But is it the end of the world? In a way, there's another echo of the conversation we had in the first hour about why social media and teenagers is different from previous moral panics. Is this different? You read your Shakespeare or your Wilkie Collins, and they were written in serial form. So one of the reasons why Charles Dickens is such a page-turner is because you'd have to wait until the next edition of the magazine that the story was being published in came out. That's how he wrote. Novels for a long time were largely epistolary. So they would be letters. They'd be written in letter form, and then it changed, you know? So is it necessarily, if you look at cinema through the lens of other art forms, are these changes necessarily negative? They're just changes. Change isn't by definition bad. It just feels to our generation, to my generation, it feels bad. And I guess the quality of technology at home now means that some of the stuff that you would rely on for the cinema, like the bangs and the crashes and the special effects, your telly is getting ever closer, especially if you've got a sound bar or a few speakers rigged up in the room. Your telly is getting ever closer. And gamers are more likely to have the best rigs for turning a sitting room or a bedroom into a hub, an entertainment hub. You stick a VR headset on. I mean, if you're wearing a VR headset, you're watching an IMAX screen, are you, effectively? So, I mean, he is probably just right. But why is this sad? Why is this a tragedy? Because I still think that it is. Madison is in Barnet. Madison, what would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say that I personally, as an 18-year-old, do think it is a tragedy because I know that my generation are guilty of causing parts of this.
Yes.
Because of short-form content and access to it, such things like TikTok and YouTube, that I know people my age are more likely to watch film clips or absorb short-form content rather than want to go to the cinema and sit through films that are 3 hours long.
Do they start, physically fidgeting?
I can imagine. So, I feel like in some circumstances I am guilty of it myself because I've grown up with social media. But also it's a case of what I also think is that films are starting to get a bit too long.
Go on.
And if you look at the past two award seasons, the two of the biggest films, both this year The Brutalist and last year Oppenheimer, or was it 2023, Oppenheimer, they're both the top films for all the awards, and they're both around 3 hours long. The Brutalist even has an interval, and it's in a space because I've argued this with, I study media at school, and I've argued this, and because I'm a big theatre fan, and people ask me, why wouldn't you go to see a film that had an interval but you'd see a show? Because you've got the live aspect.
Yes.
With the film, you don't have that.
You used to, I'm at risk of sounding like even more of an old git than usual. We used to have intermissions, they were called, at the cinema. They wouldn't always come half. Don't say like that, Madison, like you're indulging my geriatric.
My parents always point that out to me. How
thank you for saying parents and not grandparents. That's very kind and very generous of you, very thoughtful. But we did have an intermission, but it wasn't because the films were so long. It would usually come between. You'd have a short film and then you'd have the main feature. Mm-hmm. You go and buy your Kiora Orange and your popcorn. So what will we? Because I think what you're describing is probably self-indulgent directors.
Yeah.
On the length of the film.
And it's a lot more with directors also editing now. There's less of a. Okay. It's much more with. Well, think of Anora this year. Sean Baker won awards for literally every production category at the Oscars.
And that means it's but it was a brilliant film. So
I out of all of apart from my top cited.
Two. What do you think we will lose, especially if you were trying to explain to fellow 18-year-olds who sounded like Steve Buscemi? If you were trying to explain to fellow 18-year-olds who don't share your passion for cinema, and they're reading this story and going, meh, what will they lose? What will we lose when cinemas wither?
Well, you'll lose it's sort of like the joy of the exclusivity. Like the thing with short form media streaming platforms is when something's not exclusive, it's the same as if you're going to see a show and it's got a limited run. It's like you want to be there, especially if it's a film that goes on to be a breaking point for a director. And it's some films don't even get the chance to be in the cinema nowadays. I know that from my mum. Her film wasn't able to be in cinema. It went straight to Amazon Prime.
Oh, really?
Like, it's a case of it's the exclusivity, and people will I know that my friends have joys of going to the cinema when they were kids to see Disney films and see things like that. And I think it's you don't never know how much you miss something until it's gone.
As Joni Mitchell, you've probably never heard of Joni Mitchell, but
I know who that is.
You don't know what you've got till it's gone. It's very true, and that's why I think some cinemas will survive, as I say, but they will not be the kind of the massive multiplexes of my youth, or actually my youth is so long ago that there were little cinemas in Kidderminster, but then the massive multiplexes came along and there'd be 12 screens and you thought it was heaven on earth, and for a while it was, but A, there probably aren't enough good films being released to justify that, and B, people aren't taking the risks that they used to take. Madison, that was brilliant. Just so you know, Karen got in touch while you were talking to say, when did 18-year-olds get to be so articulate? 12-foot, probably because you watch a lot of films or read a lot of books. Carmen is in Covent Garden. Carmen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Carmen.
I must say, I'm surprised you haven't heard of Jeanne Dielman.
Good Lord, could you sound any more condescending? How dare you cast aspersions on my cinematic pedigree?
I do want to say one thing before I start.
Yes. You've already started, mate. What?
The Prince Charles Cinema is the most fantastic cinema in London, and it's the one very close to where you sit right now.
You're absolutely right.
And the people who program the Prince Charles programs are fantastic because they show such a wide selection. They show old films and new films on the same day.
Yeah, it's true.
They also, I took up lifetime membership of the Prince Charles about 50 years ago. And, it was only 20 quid then.
Gosh, that's worth 10 shillings.
And so I pay now £7.50 for anything before 6 o'clock. And I pay £10 for an evening film if I want to go and see an evening film.
It's still a lot, but it's a fraction of.
Listen, James. It's not.
No, it is if you haven't got £10. It is if you haven't got £10.
There's plenty of people who are happy to spend that in the pub in 5 minutes.
No, I agree with you. But
of course.
What will we lose?
It's a magical experience.
Go on, explain it to a skeptic or a child.
Sitting in a dark arena with like-minded people, and I just want to say, when I go to the Prince Charles, there are loads of young people there.
Yes, there are.
And it's usually pretty full.
Students.
Yeah, okay, and students supposedly don't have much money, but they're there. And you sit there, you don't stop the film, you don't get up and make yourself a cup of tea or pour a glass of wine or text someone, or you sit. They're like-minded people. They're people who can sit through a film without interruption, unless they have to go to the loo from time to time. But it's also.
But then, if I'm sitting there thinking I must go to the cinema, I'm not going to go, I must go to the cinema because there's going to be loads of other people there watching it. And like-minded is something more. I need more than that. I need more poetry from you, Carmen. I need something.
Okay, I'll give you poetry. If you go to the Prince Charles Cinema before it opens for the first show of the day, you will see groups of people, of adults. Usually adults, unless it's a kids' film. They don't really show kids' films much. But you will see a group of adults with intelligence burning in their eyes. If they're going to see an old film, say like Citizen Kane,
it's like proper art, isn't it? It's a real kind of sense. It's like going to a gallery. Also, go on.
Yeah. You without the old cinema, there'd be no new cinema. And this guy from Netflix is wrong.
I don't think he is wrong.
And the Spielbergs of this world will not stop making films for.
No, but they're
cinema.
They're very old men.
I know it's a minority.
But they're also very old men. He's not talking to them. He's not saying, "Yo, Marty, stop making movies." He's talking to the younger generation of directors who would be a little bit foolish if they aimed for the audience at the Prince Charles. And beautiful and poetic though your paean has been. I said no poems. It has been really an ode to the Prince Charles Cinema in Leicester Square, which is accessible to a relatively small proportion of the people listening to this programme. All cinemas have a magic. Even the massive old multiplex or the flea pit with the sticky floors, they have a magic. And it is something close to what Carmen described, sitting there in the dark. So you say it's great, you're sitting there in the dark with strangers. That sounds a bit suspect. And in fact, well, no, we won't go there. But the cinemas in up and down the land, cinemas all over the country offer something in common. So it shouldn't, and I don't know what that is, because all I've done here is list the things that are specific and unique. The Prince Charles being a case in point, the art house chains, the ones that let you have a beef burger. What do they all have in common? Whether you're scraping chewing gum off your shoe or whether you're sitting in a state-of-the-art auditorium, what do they all have in common? I don't know if I can answer that.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time. I've got a missing word round for you. I completely forgot. I'll do it now. We've been eating blank wrong. Keith's got one as well. Decide which one you prefer, mine or Keith. So mine is we've been eating blank wrong. Do you know what that is? What's the missing word? Do you know what that is? The missing word in that one? We've been eating blank wrong. And here's Keith's. UK Thai deal sees 90% reduction in blank by post. So this is the Royal Mail. According to the Home Office, we did a deal with Thailand, did you know that? That has seen a 90% reduction in blank by post. So you don't need to vote on which one your favourite is. That would be too complicated. But we've got about 10 minutes of that. And I've also got to give you a quick heads up on this week's Full Disclosure, which is really important. You know, sometimes there are very, very famous people on Full Disclosure, and sometimes there are people that you've never heard of, and sometimes there are people in between, or they sit perhaps closer on the graph to people you've never heard of than they do to the very, very famous. You probably have heard of Kenneth Roth, whether you realise it or not, because he used to head up Human Rights Watch. He was the executive director of Human Rights Watch. He spent 30 years there, and the work that they do is extraordinary. It's a beautiful interview. He's written a very, very, very good book, but it's a beautiful interview from my point of view, because it restored a little bit of hope at a time when there wasn't much. We sat down a couple of weeks ago. The direction of White House traffic was clearly hideous, even though some people were still pretending otherwise. Those pretenses, even Boris Johnson now has changed his tune completely on Donald Trump and Ukraine and Vladimir Putin, and pretended that he'd never said all the things that he'd said previously. But Johnson's going to Johnson, right? Kenneth Roth has to work in the real world, unlike a certain brand of politician, and he has to actually try to get terrible people to stop doing terrible things. Never let the perfect be the enemy of the good could almost be his catchphrase. You've got terrible things happening in Syria. You have to get Assad, before he was removed, to stop them. It's no, I mean, listen, you may well support armed insurrection. You may well be in favour of regime change. But if you're trying to stop, for example, torture, you've got to deal with the torturers. I'd never thought of that before. It had never really occurred. It's a great luxury of sitting in a studio every day, coming up with sweeping statements and broad generalisations and generally well-meaning insights, but sometimes perhaps naive ones. You want to stop torture. It's why I get a little frustrated, I suppose, with people who text in with whataboutery. You're talking about something because that's what you want to talk about today. And you these self-appointed eternal undergraduates text in going, yes, but why aren't you talking about this? And you go, well, because I'm not. I'm talking about something else. It's stupid. It's like I'm eating a cheese sandwich and you text me a sandwich. I say, yes, but what about prawns? I go, well, I'm eating a cheese sandwich. Why are you asking me why I'm not eating prawns, you freak? And what you realise when you speak to someone like Kenneth Roth is that his job is to stop that person there being tortured. And while he may welcome regime change, he has to stop that. His job today is... Anyway, I'll play you 2 minutes of our conversation and urge you to listen to the whole hour, because it's actually important, and I don't say that very often. It's important, and voices like his are arguably more important now than they were when he joined Human Rights Watch in 1993. And until Trump came back into the White House, of course, I don't know that we would have said that bit out loud. It's 12:53, and here is Kenneth Roth on this week's Full Disclosure with me.
I'm super disappointed that the U.S. is going in this direction. I mean, of course. But I also, I have seen a lot of this before, and I think it's important to put that in perspective. Also, just temperamentally, I've learned not to get all excited in these situations. As I describe in the book, I have met with, many heads of state, some of them utterly ruthless and evil. And you can't go in there and start screaming your head off and, remonstrating and jumping on the table. That gets nothing done. My tactic was to stay ultra rational, to always be measured, not to pull my punches at all, and to push them as hard as I could, but to do it with a very even keel voice. And part of, even if you're dealing with a total thug, there are kind of two ways you can go with the conversation. I mean, one is if they're desperate for reform, you can actually have that conversation. I mean, I describe in the book how I met with Gaddafi's government in Libya, and they were looking for approval by the international community. And I was able to basically, they were trying to bludgeon me into not publishing about their repression. I walked out of the meeting getting with them, realizing that if they didn't release the 171 political prisoners whose names I had given them, they were going to get beaten up by the media at a press conference we were about to hold in Cairo. And it worked. They were all released. So sometimes you can get stuff done. Other times, tyrants typically surround themselves by sycophants. Nobody tells them the truth. And then they think that their lies work. And so my job walking in there, well, what's he going to do to me? I mean, so I could tell him the truth. And I could say, you think you've got this brilliant answer to justify your repression, but it's crap. Nobody's buying this, And so by telling him that, I want him to leave the meeting shaken, and worried that his classic, clever PR strategy is not working. And that gives us an opening to put pressure on him to make him change.
Just a little taster there of the work that Kenneth Roth did and the lessons he learned over 30 years heading up Human Rights Watch. And if you can't bear the idea of another hour in my company on top of the 15 that we've almost come to the end of this week, then just read his book, Righting Wrongs. Righting Wrongs, 3 decades on the front lines battling abusive government. It's an incredible read, and he's an incredible man, but as you heard, completely self-effacing, completely measured voice in print and in person. Son of a Holocaust survivor as well. So when he gets onto the subject of Israel and his very considered use of the word genocide, I think it carries a particular weight, given some of the stories he shared about his father's fleeing from Nazi Germany. I forget the precise technical term. If you've escaped from the Holocaust, are you a Holocaust survivor? I'm not sure, but anyway, a Jewish man whose father fled the Holocaust, using the word genocide to describe Israel's recent actions, with one of the most interesting intellectual justifications that I've come across. A million reasons to listen. I've got time for one more call. It's gonna be Del, who's in Telford. Del, back to the cinema. Why? What is going on? Why?
I think what the problem is when you come in last.
What?
Everybody's echoed your thoughts already. There's the attention span. I think there's a lack of marketing on films as well now, and the quality of films.
When did you last go? I'm going to play the greengrocer test.
I went to watch The Sinners the other last week.
Everyone's seen that. That's done some business. Everyone I'm looking at the moment has seen. Keith has seen it. He thought it was brilliant. Eleanor has seen it. She thought it was pants.
I thought it was brilliant. I'm a big fan of Ryan Coogler anyway.
So am I.
Yeah,
and Michael B. Jordan.
And Michael B. Jordan, but there's I can't remember his name now. The main character, you would say the main character is not Michael B. Jordan. It's a young kid.
Yeah.
It's his first role in it as well. It's his very first.
But
role.
That doesn't sell the cinema though. It'd still be his first role if you'd watched it on telly, mate.
No,
sorry.
I mean, Coogler does. You had a question on Mystery Hour yesterday, actually, about film.
Yeah.
And Ryan Coogler does a fantastic explanation about the reason he filmed on 35mm and IMAX.
Oh, wow.
You can find it's on YouTube somewhere. I think Kodak did it because Kodak provided the film for him.
And it creates a different feel. It creates a different...
I mean, I didn't watch it on IMAX. I watched it on normal. But, but there is something about just sitting in a cinema. I mean, I call it my happy place. I literally call it my happy place. I go to the cinema as often as I can.
Yeah, I do too. I'm going to run out of time, Del. You've covered a lot of ground. Have you made your central point?
I love the cinema, and to the point where I can remember many films I've watched. The first film I ever watched at cinema was Young Einstein at the ABC in Wolverhampton.
Gene Hackman, the ABC in Wolverhampton. Gene, no, what's his name?
No. Young Einstein was an Australian film, an independent Australian film. Yahoo series.
Mel Brooks. It is Mel Brooks, isn't it? Is it Mel?
No,
Young Frankenstein. I'm thinking of Young Einstein. Oh, yes. Well, anyway, we're out of time. That we've been eating digestives wrong. Apparently, everyone knew that because it was in the news yesterday. No one ever tells me anything. And the UK Thai deal has seen a 90% reduction in cannabis smuggling by post. The last quarter of last year, 15 tons of cannabis was posted to this country from Thailand. And in the first quarter of this year, it fell to 1.5 tonnes. Make of that what you will. That's it from me for another day. We'll do it all again on Monday morning from 10. I hope you have a lovely weekend. If you missed, try going to the cinema, eh? If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including Full Disclosure with Kenneth, Roth and James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, but now, live from Rome, it's Shelagh Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.